I returned home to my cheating wife and a man in our bed, took revenge, and started a new life. Sitting in the New York airport, Max thought it was not the most enjoyable way to spend an evening. He observed the boarding process for what he hoped would be his flight back home to Charlotte. Max, along with his two sisters, owned a small pharmaceutical company their father had established decades earlier. His father had developed a series of valuable yet rarely used pills that kept the company profitable but offered limited growth. With his parents gone, Max had spent the past few days in New York negotiating the company's sale to a major pharmaceutical firm. Today, Max and his team of lawyers and brokers finalized the deal, leaving the paperwork to the attorneys. Max hoped to make it home tonight, but it seemed unlikely. The last flight to Charlotte for the day was fully booked, and he was third on the standby list. He refrained from calling his wife, Camila, unsure of what to tell her. He sat at the bar, keeping an eye on the gate, sipping his second gin and tonic, contemplating the deal and the substantial sum, over $10 million, that he and his sisters would share. This windfall, along with a well-compensated transition period with Big Pharma, promised a new lifestyle for him and Camila. Their twin daughters were already away at college, juniors at Duke, where tuition costs were draining his finances, but all that would change once the pharmaceutical deal was finalized. Meanwhile, the boarding process concluded, and gate agents began ushering the last passengers onto the plane. Then, a stroke of luck. The status on the boarding sign changed, and Max noticed his name move up the standby list. He threw some cash on the bar, gave a thumbs up to the bartender, grabbed his briefcase and duffel bag, and dashed for the exit. At the gate, an agent handed him his boarding pass and quickly explained, "A group of 4 who checked in remotely didn't show up, so you and 2 others are getting their seats." Max hurried down the jet bridge with his newfound companions, and upon reaching his seat, realized it was in first class. A good omen, he thought. "I made the flight. I'm heading home a day early, in first class. Maybe this means the pharmaceutical deal will indeed go through." As the boarding door closed and the plane taxied, he felt he deserved another drink. He had another gin and tonic and then dozed off, dreaming of a future where he and Camila could always fly first class. The jolt of landing woke him. Eventually, he reached the taxi stand for the ride home. A few days earlier, he had driven his pickup truck to the airport, but now, exhausted and a little tipsy, it was too late to call Camila to pick him up. They lived a few miles outside Charlotte, so the cab ride gave him enough time to nod off again. The driver had to wake him when they arrived. Max paid the fare generously, got out of the taxi a bit groggy, and as he turned toward the house, what he saw stopped him in his tracks and fully woke him up. A gold Mercedes parked in front of his side of the garage. It looked like a very stylish Mercedes, but then again, all Mercedes seemed stylish to him. The house had fallen into darkness. It was well past midnight, and Max stood motionless for several minutes. He had spoken to Camila from his lawyer's office around noon, and she hadn't mentioned anything about unexpected visitors so late. Trying to push away unthinkable thoughts, he envisioned a happy scenario where he could soon curl up with a warm, sleepy Camila, but his mind wouldn't cooperate. Slowly, he made his way through the passage between the garage and the house, unlocked the door, and entered the silent home. With deliberate steps, he moved through the kitchen and up the stairs to their bedroom, where the door stood ajar. Seemingly unprepared for guests, Max stepped inside. Then it closed. There was no other way to describe it. His mind went blank, his breathing halted, even his heart seemed to stop beating. He witnessed what he could only imagine as unthinkable. Camila lay undressed, sprawled on her side of the bed, one arm wrapped around another man who slept beside her, a faint smile on his lips. Max stood there for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, his mind started to function again. He glanced at Camila's hand resting on the man, and they both snored softly. This shattered Max's heart. Until tonight, he had found solace in listening to Camila snore, a comforting sound that meant she felt secure in the peaceful sleep they shared. He often fell asleep to that gentle purr, but now that was all gone. He would never hear that snore again, never share a bed with her. Despite his broken heart, Max began to think rationally. He noticed the man's neatly folded clothes on a chair where Max had sat countless times. Anger simmered inside him. He pulled on his pants, retrieved his wallet and car keys, and paused to consider his next move. Thoughts of grabbing a tennis racket from the bedroom closet and confronting the man crossed his mind. He even contemplated confronting Camila. Both impulses promised immediate satisfaction but threatened severe consequences. Another idea took shape in his mind. He pulled out his cell phone and started taking incriminating photos. As the plan developed, Max finished documenting the scene and gathered the man's clothes and shoes. The man was much larger than Max, taller and heavier. A tennis racket wouldn't be wise, even in the short term. With the clothes in hand, Max stole one last glance at his wife, his once beloved partner and mother of their daughters, and steeled himself against the love that had sustained him for over 2 decades. He left the bedroom dry-eyed and descended the stairs to the outside. The car's key fob beeped, and the doors of the Mercedes opened. Max stowed his briefcase and duffel bag inside before settling into the driver's seat. He had never been one for fancy cars, but as he maneuvered the Mercedes, he found himself appreciating it. After driving a mile, Max pulled over and examined the man's wallet. It contained the usual items: cash, business cards identifying him as Franklin Thompson, a senior sales manager at a local Mercedes dealership, and a driver's license with a Charlotte address. If the man had a family, Max realized he could cause significant trouble for him, and perhaps for Camila too. But for now, exhausted, Max decided to head to the nearest motel to get some rest. Camila, truly a highly cautious person, aware of her husband Max's greater intelligence. She managed to sustain an affair with Franklin Thompson for nearly 5 months without Max suspecting a thing. Max is still in New York, she thought the next morning while lying in bed with Franklin. He satisfied her physically, though not quite as well as Max. Too much like a car salesman, she mused, deciding it was time to end the affair. Franklin's growing possessiveness, including his desire to spend the night, had crossed a line. Despite Max's likely ignorance of the situation, having another man in their marital bed felt too disrespectful. She planned to call Franklin later that day and firmly but kindly end things. Then, she headed for the shower. As she dressed back in the bedroom, Franklin emerged from the shower wrapped in a towel. He paused, then asked, "Camila, where did my clothes go?" "What?" "I didn't move anything," she replied. "Where are you going tonight?" "I left them folded on this chair. They're gone." "Did you take them to the guest room?" she began, but he hurried down the hall and returned empty-handed. "No, they're not there. They're nowhere." Camila impatiently suggested, "Maybe you left them downstairs last night after we came in?" "No, I'm sure I didn't, but I'll go check," Franklin said, leaving the room and quickly returning. Camila, my car's gone too. Someone was here, took my clothes and stole my car. Damn it, what's happening?" Camila struggled to grasp the situation. How could his clothes and car vanish when they'd been home all night? Could someone have broken in? She sank onto the bed, and Franklin asked, "What's wrong?" Camila tried to speak, her breath catching. "Franklin, what if it was Max?" she finally managed. "What if he came back from New York while we were asleep and took your things in your car?" "Damn," Franklin muttered, collapsing beside her. "We need to find out where he is. It could be him, but if he's still in New York, then it's a break-in. We have to call the police. I need my stuff and my car back." "Oh damn, this car, if we involve the police, they'll ask whose car it is, and it's in my wife's name for some tax reason." His voice trailed off, imagining the potential fallout from bad to catastrophic. "I'll call his office. His secretary gets in very early, so she should know where he is." Camila pulled out her phone and dialed Max's office number. Despite the early hour, Max's secretary answered promptly. "Max Trork office. How can I assist you?" "Hey Sheila, it's Camila. I know it's early and I'm not sure where Max is. He didn't call last night. Have you heard from him?"
"Hi, Camila. It's still early here."
"The team in New York worked late yesterday, so they'll probably start late today. I spoke with Max around 6 yesterday evening before I left. He mentioned they were making good progress and might finalize a deal today." "He said that? That's good to hear, so he's still in New York, right?" she asked. "Yes, I'm certain he is. I expect to hear from him once they're back at the lawyer's office." "Should I have him call you?" he responded. "Yes, please, but only if he has a moment." "I know how crucial this deal is," she replied. "Understood, bye," he said, and they hung up. Camila turned to Franklin. "Max is still in New York, so we should call emergency and report a break-in and car theft," she told him. "Camila, what do we tell them? That your lover had his clothes stolen from your bedroom and his car stolen from your driveway?" "What the hell? This is a disaster," Franklin exclaimed. "Okay, I get it. Let's think this through. How about I drop you off at home and you report the thefts as happening there while your wife was taking the kids to school? Maybe skip the stolen clothes." "Those would be harder to explain than a missing car," she suggested. "Yeah, except yesterday I told my wife I was going to Atlanta for a meeting on the new Mercedes S-Class and wouldn't be home until noon," he said. "Okay, we can wait until noon. When you're back, you drove home, left your keys in the car for a quick stop before going to the dealership, and your car was stolen while you were inside," she proposed. "You know, I think that could work. I could also say my wallet was in the car and got stolen. We can hang out here for a few hours, maybe take another shower together," Franklin said with a suggestive tone. "Franklin," she responded, her tone serious. Okay, yeah, I need to call work to take a sick day, he said, realizing the gravity of the situation. Camila, who worked as a paralegal in a small law firm, found the job somewhat dull. She stepped into the hallway to make a call, and when she returned, she found Franklin back in bed. Tempted, she thought of Max and her recent decision to end the affair, ultimately deciding to decline. "Franklin," she said, making no move to undress. "I think it's time to end this. We've had our fun, but last night it could have been Max. We're fortunate it was just a burglar. Let's find some clothes and maybe grab breakfast somewhere." Franklin looked at her briefly, considered arguing, but ultimately realized she was right. They had been lucky, but shouldn't push their luck. "Yes," he agreed, inwardly recalling, with a slight smile, another attractive middle-aged mother who often visited the car dealership. "Okay, I agree. It's been good." "So how about some clothes?" he said. It proved more challenging than expected. Franklin was 50 lbs heavier and 4 inches taller than Max. Eventually, Camila managed to find a pair of worn-out sweatpants that fit Franklin somewhat, fashioning makeshift adjustments with strings to hold them up. She also unearthed a faded sweatshirt, now tinged pink from a sloppy wash, which she further modified with trimmed sleeves and widened armholes. Despite wanting to make a remark about the outfit resembling clown attire, she only smiled faintly at Franklin's expression. They decided to pass the time watching TV until it was time to head to Franklin's house. Earlier that morning, around the time Franklin discovered his missing clothes and car, Max arrived at the address listed on Franklin's driver's license. It was a pleasant house with a small bicycle leaning against the garage wall. Max sat in his car, contemplating, wondering, still devoid of tears. His night at the motel had passed swiftly, and he hadn't gone for a run until dawn. Surprisingly, he didn't feel worse. Perhaps he was still in shock. He approached the front door, holding Franklin's wallet with the driver's license visible. He rang the bell, and a young woman in her 20s, attractive yet somewhat disheveled, answered. Max wore a suit purchased the previous day in New York, now rumpled, a white shirt, and no tie. Despite not looking his best, he hoped not to appear threatening. He held up Franklin's driver's license for her to see and gestured towards the gold Mercedes. Before he could speak, the woman slammed the door shut, then reopened it moments later with her cell phone in hand. "I have emergency ready to dial. Tell me my husband is okay." "Ma'am, I have a photo on my phone of your husband and my wife in bed last night, both undressed and fast asleep. Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with your husband or mine. If you want to call emergency, go ahead. I'll wait in the car." They stared at each other until her expression softened, and she opened the door, beginning to say something when a voice from the kitchen interrupted with, "Mommy, wait here, I'll be right back," she said, turning towards what Max presumed was the kitchen. He heard voices, hers and at least one child's, before she returned with a cup of coffee for him. "I hope you take it black. I need to get the kids ready for school and drop them off. Honestly, I trust you more than my husband right now. You can wait here until I get back and then we can talk." "Sure, okay," Max replied. Seems we're both in a similar situation. He settled into the living room and soon the woman reappeared with 2 children, introducing him as Dad's friend before leaving with them. Max sat quietly, sipping on the mediocre coffee, contemplating calling his office, but ultimately remaining seated. When she returned, she hurried upstairs briefly and returned looking more composed, her hair brushed and lips lightly tinted. She extended her hand to Max. "Sorry for the chaos earlier. I'm Molly Thompson, currently married to Franklin Thompson, who happens to be involved with your wife." Max couldn't help but chuckle at her phrasing, a brief moment of relief. "You've summed up the situation perfectly. I'm Max Trork and my wife's name is Camila Trork. Let me explain what happened last night." As Max recounted the events, Molly began to cry. "I'm filing for divorce from Camila, and these photos will certainly help with the settlement. I can send them to your phone if you think you might need them." "Yes, please keep them," Molly replied, her eyes dull. Max started to reach for his phone but paused as Molly continued. "Hold on. I don't want those images burned into my memory forever. You keep them, and if I ever need them, I'll call you." "Okay, of course," Max agreed, adding, "I probably won't be staying at my current job or home for much longer. Here's my lawyer's contact information. Feel free to reach out if you need the photos or any assistance with divorce proceedings." "Thank you," Molly said. "But what should we do now? Are you returning the car, waiting for Franklin to confront him? He's a big guy, despite putting on some weight. Supposedly, he was in Atlanta for a car meeting overnight and should be back this afternoon. You know, I'm rather fond of this car, and I've never driven a Mercedes before. I think I'll keep it until someone insists otherwise. As for your husband, let's just call him Idiot for now." She chuckled, and Max joined in, both needing the release. "Actually, the car is registered in my name," Molly disclosed. "For tax reasons, more depreciation, I think." Franklin, or should I say idiot. Put it in my name since I use it more. She paused thoughtfully before continuing. Since it's my car, I can give you permission to drive it, and if you get stopped, the police can call me to verify. Max appreciated the plan but held back, sensing Molly was still refining it. And one more thing, she added. There have been a lot of burglaries in our neighborhood lately. You have Franklin's keys and clothes. If the spare key we hid in the backyard is missing when he arrives, he might attempt to break in. And if our security system is set to instant alert mode, he'll attract some unwanted police attention. Molly, I think I'm falling for you all over again. You're amazing. Okay, let's stay calm. Franklin can wait until this afternoon when the kids and I get home from school. I'll pick them up and take them to the park for a while. Let's give him more time to get into even more trouble. Whatever happens, keep me updated, especially if he gets into trouble with the police, and call me when you need to return the car. I don't want you getting into any trouble. We're good now. You need to get going, so do I. Max drove off in a splendid gold Mercedes, pondering how much the same model in a better color might cost. Molly handed him the permission slip, and he assumed she would retrieve the hidden key, set the alarm, and be gone for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, Camila and Franklin arrived at his house around noon. She dropped him off hastily, as if avoiding an infection, and he approached his front door, hoping it might be unlocked because Molly was home, but also fearing her presence. It was, of course, locked. He hurried around to the backyard rock where they kept the spare key, only to find it missing. Oh, crap, he muttered, scanning the back of the house, considering breaking in. He attempted the back door, but it too was locked. Left with little choice, he contemplated breaking a window along the rear wall, opting for the family room window due to its size. He broke off a branch from a tree for leverage. Barefoot, he needed a way to avoid the broken glass. Grabbing 2 chairs from the porch, he positioned them beneath the window, planning to climb over them carefully into the living room. Taking a few deep breaths, he prepared himself. Franklin tossed the branch through the family room window, which shattered satisfyingly, followed by the blaring of the home alarm system. A stroke of bad luck, compounded by a passing police car. Earlier that morning, Molly had alerted the police about potential break-ins in the neighborhood. Damn it! Franklin cursed, scrambling over the chairs to enter the house and disabled the security system, but he wasn't quick enough. Police, stop right there and slowly step away from the house, hands up, an officer commanded. Franklin glanced back, seeing 2 officers with drawn pistols. He complied, managing to scrape his legs as he descended from the chairs and backed away. Officers, I can explain, he began, but one of them swiftly handcuffed him, ignoring his attempt to clarify. His rights were read aloud, and he was asked if he wanted to make a statement. Yes, this is my house, and I didn't have a key, so I broke in to get some clothes and call my office, Franklin explained. The officers eyed Franklin's tracksuit, perhaps thinking clown clothes, and one asked for identification. No, not on me right now. You see, I lost my car and all my clothes, so I just needed to get inside to find some real clothes, Franklin continued. How did you lose your car, sir? One officer asked. Well, I stayed at a friend's place last night, and this morning the car, wasn't there, Franklin stammered. It just disappeared, huh? Have you reported it missing? Maybe you left it somewhere, the officer pressed. Franklin hesitated. He didn't want to reveal his whereabouts, or why he hadn't reported the car missing. But going to jail for trying to enter his own home was also not appealing, especially with the uncomfortable handcuffs. Then, an idea struck him. You could call my wife. She can confirm who I am, and maybe you could take me to my office. Someone there can help me get some clothes. Knowing dealing with dealership drama was preferable to jail, Franklin gave Molly's phone number to one of the officers who called her. Franklin could hear part of the conversation. Ma'am, this is Officer Ree from the Charlotte Police Department. We're at the address he provided, the location. We have a man here claiming to be your husband. He attempted to break into your house because he lost his clothes, and yes ma'am, no ma'am. Yes ma'am, we will, of course, do that. Thank you ma'am, the officer said, turning back to Franklin. The officer said the lady says her husband is in Atlanta and anyone breaking into her house must be a burglar. She hopes we throw you in jail and toss away the key. But, Franklin was nearly in tears as the officers escorted him to their patrol car to take him to the station. Meanwhile, Camila arrived at her office half a day later, but determined to catch up, with thoughts of Max still on her mind. She tried calling his cell phone but received no answer. She then dialed his office number again. Hello, Sheila, it's Camila again. I'm starting to get a little worried about Max since I still haven't heard anything from him. Have you heard anything? Camila asked. No updates yet. He's likely still in New York with the lawyers, but it's unusual for him not to call. Since you're concerned, I'll check on him and get back to you shortly, Sheila replied. All right, thank you, Sheila. You're the best secretary ever, Camila said. A few minutes later, Camila received a call back. Camila, it's Sheila. I spoke with a secretary at the law office. Max left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight to Charlotte. I called him, and he asked me to let you know he'll call you later, Sheila informed her. Okay, thanks, Sheila, thanks, Camila said, a pit forming in her stomach. Meanwhile, Max drove a gold Mercedes to a divorce lawyer recommended by Fred Thomas, his longtime business lawyer. Trusting Fred's referral, he hoped for the best. Mr. Torque, please have a seat. Miss Reinhardt will be with you shortly, the secretary informed him. Max settled in, finding some comfort in the lawyer's office, neither extravagant nor cheap. Before worry could set in, a middle-aged woman with dyed red hair entered. Mr. Torque? Max nodded as she introduced herself. I'm Anna Reinhardt. Fred spoke highly of you, so let's discuss your situation in my office, she said. They moved to her office where Max accepted coffee from the secretary and began his story, discovering his wife's infidelity, seeking a divorce, and protecting his assets, notably from his and his sister's company sale. He omitted the Mercedes incident, unsure how Anna would react. Max, may I call you that? Anna asked. Max agreed and she continued. Here's some relatively good news. Given your circumstances, Fred mentioned your ownership of the company before marriage, making those shares separate property. Your wife has no claim on them or their proceeds. Keep them separate from any joint accounts. Understand? I believe so, Max replied. What about our home? Retirement accounts and such? Well, it's less favorable there, Anna explained. Given your higher income, expect child support for several years. We might mitigate contributions to retirement by adjusting alimony. It's not ideal, but it avoids future issues, especially splitting retirement funds. Your kids are college-bound, so no child support there. You okay with covering their college expenses? Yes, that works, Max confirmed. What about the house? You and your wife need to decide. You can sell it and split the proceeds, or one of you can buy out the other based on its current appraised value, Anna responded. After what I witnessed last night, I definitely don't want this house anymore. I doubt Camila can afford to buy my share, so selling it seems like the best option, Max decided. All right, I'll prepare the necessary paperwork accordingly. The divorce petition is fairly standard, so I can have it ready for you early tomorrow if you'd like. We can serve it to her tomorrow afternoon and propose a settlement next week, Anna said. Wow, that's pretty quick. Max started. Max, listen to me. If there's any chance for reconciliation, perhaps counseling or sometime, Anna suggested. No, it's just a shock right now. Less than 24 hours ago, I was happy, eager to share news of the company sale with my wife. Now, I'm here discussing divorce, but we have to move forward. I'll figure out how to handle this. Okay, Max said, trying to steady himself. If you change your mind, just give me a call and we can reassess, Anna offered. Max thanked her, settled the fee, and left the office. Walking back to the gold Mercedes, he wondered about the events with the man he saw last night. It reminded him he promised his secretary to call Camila. Camila answered in her law firm office. Camila, it's Max. You called and were looking for me, Max said. Oh, Max, thanks for calling. I missed you. Where are you? Camila asked. I'm here in Charlotte, Max replied. Max, when did you get back? The pit in her stomach twisted. Last night, Camila, I got back last night, Max said. The pit grew heavier. Camila leaned back, struggling to breathe, let alone speak. Max, I think I should hang up, she said. No, Camila, please, Max said. Can we meet somewhere? I need to see you just for a few minutes. Max hesitated. This woman was his love, the mother of his daughters, the most significant person in his life for over 20 years. Okay, Camila, Center Cafe at 6. The pain intensified. Camila reluctantly agreed. The Center Cafe held sentimental value. They had first met there with friends long ago. Over time, it became their special place. Now, she felt anxious. Max had suggested it and she had to agree. Max, I'll be there, and please understand I'm sorry and I love you, Camila said, her voice breaking. Max hung up. Camila sat, tears streaming, the pain deepening. Camila arrived early at the cafe. Max hadn't arrived yet. She ordered a glass of wine and reflected on her self-perception. Her initial experiences were with robust football players in college. Although she had flirted in high school, it was the football players who had made her feel vulnerable, holding her down. When Max came into her life, she thought she had overcome those feelings. He was everything she needed, strong, loving, a great father, a good provider. That should have been enough, but on the flight back from the West Coast, everything changed. Max was on a business trip, pitching a new pill to a pharmaceutical company, and she had accompanied him for the weekend. Flying back alone on an overnight flight, she sat next to a burly man, the coach of a local NFL team. They chatted, drank too much, and she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. She woke to find his hand between her legs, under her skirt. Now, reflecting on that night, she knew she should have screamed or pushed his hand away, but she didn't, and the guilt, the absence of it, troubled her. She only felt relief when Max returned later that week, and she had recovered physically and emotionally. The coach left after one season, but not before introducing her to a player from the practice squad. He wasn't a star, but like the coach, he was dominating in bed. She felt grateful when he was transferred elsewhere. Eventually, guilt surfaced, and she ended the affair, wanting to remain faithful to Max. She thought she had put her infidelity behind her. By the time their daughters left for college, she cherished her renewed bond with Max during this period. Then Max surprised her with a generous gift, a new luxury car of her choice. Unfortunately, she chose to visit the Mercedes dealership where she met Franklin Thompson. He didn't just sell her a car, he seduced her. She knew it was wrong, compounded by the fact that Franklin wasn't even good in bed. Despite her previous indiscretions, she believed her marriage was strong. Now, she loved Max more than ever and wanted to be faithful. It was the right thing. Allowing Franklin into their marital bed was a mistake, even before Max found out. Now, she feared the consequences she might have to face. "Hello, Camila." Max's voice pulled Camila's gaze up to see him standing there. He appeared visibly aged since his return from New York, a change she blamed herself for. The serpent in her gut continued to coil and bite. "Hi, Max. Thank you for being here. I don't even know where to begin to express how sorry I am." "Can I ask you a few questions?" he asked, taking a seat. "Oh, Max, please, no. If we have any chance, questions and answers will only destroy that chance. Max, we should run away for a few days to a Caribbean island where we can reconnect, hold each other. Camila, please, you're not seeing clearly. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave now." The snake continued to torment her, but Camila knew she had to endure the pain and let Max express his anger however he needed. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way through his rage to some form of reconciliation. "Okay, Max, ask me anything. Do you know what time I got home last night?" A peculiar question, she thought. No, not exactly. It had to be after." She trailed off, knowing his next question already. "And do you know what I found when I got home? When I went upstairs to our bedroom, or should I say, what used to be our bedroom?" "Yes, Max, I know what you must have seen, and I know it must have been one of the worst things you've ever seen in your life. And I know it's entirely my fault that you saw this, and I'm begging you, please, listen to me. Max, I'm sorry, so sorry that. I won't fight the divorce you want if you want." "Shut up, Camila." Next question. "How many men have there been since we got married? If you lie, if I think you're lying, I'm leaving." Camila's first instinct was to lie, then she realized it was too risky. Finally, she concluded that the marriage was likely over anyway. 3, max. 3 men whom I now deeply regret ever meeting. "I can see in your eyes that our marriage is over, and I understand. You deserve someone better than me. I'm willing to do almost anything to give us another chance, but I understand if you want nothing to do with me anymore. Call the lawyer, Camila. Tomorrow you will be served with divorce papers." Max stood up and left. Camila sat there, initially too stunned to cry. As she processed what Max had just said, the pain in her stomach intensified, and she began to cry. Max walked out of the cafe, reflecting on how he and Camila had first met there decades ago. He wondered if this would be their last lovemaking conversation. Closeness, he thought bitterly, had become a curse. Hearing her confess to having lovemaking with other men, and seeing her with Franklin in their bed, asleep, snoring for God's sake. How would he ever get over this? Maybe he could handle knowing about 3 faceless men over their 20-odd years together, with some counseling and a lot of groveling on her part, maybe. But he would never get over that scene in their bed. Their marriage was finished. Sitting in that damn gold Mercedes, he finally cried. As darkness fell, Max blew his nose, wiped his face, and remembered what Molly Thompson had said that morning, which now felt like a year ago. She had told him not to send her the pictures of him cheating, believing it would be harder to forgive with visual evidence. Max decided to call her, share this thought, and check on the situation with the Mercedes. "Hello," Molly answered the call. "Molly, it's Max Trourk from this morning, just checking in to see how you're doing and what to do with the car." "Max, thanks for calling. I'm managing. You can keep the car for now. Franklin is in so much trouble he won't need it for a while." "Trouble? I hope you didn't shoot him." "No, but he might have preferred that. He got arrested for trying to break into our house and took a swing at one of the cops. He's a big guy, and the cops shot him with a stun weapon. Then something happened while he was in jail. He doesn't want to talk about it, but I think he might have been attacked by another prisoner. I refused to speak to him, so he had to call his brother to post bail. Now his whole family knows what's going on. Wow, Molly, I can't say I feel sorry for him, but I do feel sorry for you. I wanted to tell you that you made the right decision this morning, not to look at the pictures of him cheating. If you have any chance of reconciliation, those photos would make it a lot harder. Yeah, he came home a couple of hours ago, crying, apologizing, and begging me to let him stay, at least for now. We have 2 little kids, so I'm going to try to work things out, but life won't be easy for him. His own brother, a lawyer, told me to push for a prenuptial agreement and offered to help. Plus, I'll be managing our finances for a while. Franklin will be on a short leash and I'll be tugging his collar often. Stay strong, Molly. I wish you all the best. When you need to return the car, just call me. They hung up, and Max sat there, feeling a bit envious of Molly. Maybe Franklin had learned his lesson. Being arrested and charged with assaulting a police officer, combined with his experience in jail, might have frightened him significantly. Max hoped so for Molly's and their children's sake. Finally, he drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more task before trying to sleep, calling his daughters, Jane and Joan. "Hi, Daddy," it seemed like Jane had answered. They were twins, not identical, but close enough. They sounded alike and attended the same expensive college, studying nursing. At least they didn't look exactly alike. Similar and clearly sisters, but not obviously twins. Max often admitted to himself that he was glad they weren't identical. They were already skilled at ganging up on him, and it would be even harder if 2 identical young women were persuading him to buy a car, stay out late, or give them money for a spring break trip to Florida. "Daddy, please!" But he also admitted, again only to himself, that he enjoyed spoiling them. "Janie, yes, you guessed right. Of course there was a 50-50th chance. What's up?" "Listen, tomorrow is Saturday, and I'd like to invite you and your sister for breakfast. Well, let's call it brunch, maybe around 11 or so, at that bistro on 4th Street we used to go to." That works for me. Hold on a second." He heard some noise, and then she came back. "And Joan is good with it too. Can we?" He quickly interrupted her because at their last brunch, 6 or 7 of their friends had shown up. "Let's make it just the 3 of us, okay?" "Of course," Jane replied. "But tell me what?" Again he cut her off, not wanting to have a difficult conversation over the phone, which was challenging even in person. "Listen, I have to go. See you at 11. Love you, and tell your sister I love her too. Bye." He hung up, hoping she wouldn't call Camila, but knowing he couldn't tell her that, otherwise she would have called Camila immediately. 11 tomorrow morning would come soon enough. After Max left the cafe, leaving Camila with his warning, or curse, to hire a lawyer, her tears were uncontrollable. She knew she had ruined everything, her marriage, her family, her entire life. She realized her daughters would find out, her parents would know, and all her friends would learn about it. She would likely lose Max, her home, and poor Max seeing her in their bed, undressed, probably with Franklin, who had a hardness, must have nearly eliminated him. Her tears continued to flow. Eventually, the waitress came over and asked if she needed to go to the ladies' room. Camila choked back her sobs and managed to say, "No, thank you." She paid the bill and left, heading back to the house that would soon no longer be hers. When she got there, she found some gin, just the wrong amount. Not enough to make her pass out, but too much to help her figure out how to get Max back. After drinking it all, she fell asleep, hoping for a miracle that would bring Max back to her. Max was sitting in the bistro at 11 the next morning when his daughters walked in. He had reviewed and approved the draft divorce petition early that morning, then drove 2 hours from Charlotte, using the drive to figure out how to break the news to Jane and Joan. Initially, everything seemed normal. Hugs and kisses, how was school, how was work. They ordered and ate their food, had their plates cleared, and then finally, the real conversation began. "Dad, we know something is wrong," Joan started. "You look a bit unwell. Are you here to tell us you have cancer or something, and if so, where is Mom?" "Girls, I do have really bad news, but it's not physical. No one is dying. It's about Mom." Jane interrupted. "She did something terrible, didn't she? Oh my God, did she run off with one of her firm's lawyers? Some young, strong guy that Janie or I should be chasing?" Both girls burst out laughing, stunned by the absurdity, until they saw their father wasn't laughing. "Dad? No, not Mom." Joan couldn't voice her fear aloud. "Girls, listen carefully. Yes, Mom cheated. She cheated on me, but that doesn't mean she cheated on you." Joan, crying, said, "Dad, if her cheating is destroying our family, then yes, she cheated on us just as much as she cheated on you." Both girls cried, and then Max started crying too. They stood up, trying to hug their dad and each other at the same time. "Dad, let's get out of here," Jane suggested. "There's a park about 2 blocks from here, and we'll have more privacy there." People were starting to stare, so Max quickly paid the bill, and they walked to the park, a daughter on each side of him, all holding on to each other. "Tell us, Dad, Jane said after they found a bench to share. We deserve to know how bad it is. Yeah, right, Joan added. We're mature enough to handle this. On the way here, I was trying to figure out how to tell you, Max began. I agree, you are both adults, and yes, your mother did cheat on all of us. I found her at home, in our bed, with another man, and she later admitted there had been others before him. I think I'm still in shock, but I know that she and I can't recover from this. I've already talked to a divorce lawyer, and Mom is getting a divorce petition today. They cried more and then fell silent, contemplating the news and their future. Girls, no matter how bad it is, you need to prioritize yourselves and your schoolwork. There's enough money to cover your senior year at Duke, and if either of you wants to pursue graduate studies, I believe I can find funds for that too, but there's a condition. They looked at him, curious. I'm willing to pay for your education, but I expect you to work hard and get good grades. Yes, what Mom did makes it hard to concentrate, but you told me you're adults, real adults, mature, disciplined people can handle such adversity, right? They looked at each other, cried again, and hugged him. Yes, Daddy, you are the best, and we won't let you down, Joan assured him, while Jane looked pensive. Dad, Joan is right, we won't let you down, but what about you? Will you be okay? What are you going to do? Well, you can think about a lot during a 2-hour drive. First, I want you both to know that what you said doesn't surprise me at all. I know you'll continue to do well in school, and I will continue to be proud of you. As for me, what your mother did slapped me hard. I could crawl into a hole, suffer, feel sorry for myself, and try to reconcile with your mom, but I realized that doesn't suit me. I've spent my entire adult life taking care of others. When I started working for my grandparents' company, I took care of them. After they left, I took care of my sisters, as they owned their shares in the company. Then I took care of your mother, and I took care of you girls. It might sound like I'm complaining, but I'm not. The company will soon be sold, which will relieve me of responsibility for my sisters. Camila is gone, and you guys. I promise I'll be happy to help you start your adult lives. So what? 2 home runs out of 3 in terms of the women in my life. Not bad. That leaves me, and guess what? I see this whole situation, with betrayal and divorce, not as the worst thing, but as a chance to start a new life. A life dedicated to taking care of one person. Me. Fine, Dad, really? If you mean what you say, that's great, Joan said. Jane was more skeptical. Dad, what does all this really mean? New life? Working for another pharmaceutical company? Buying a farm? Good question. I do have an answer, no details yet, but this new life will be physical. I'm going to run marathons, climb mountains, swim across the Atlantic, climb the Alps, go on safari. I have a million things I'm going to do, and guess what? While doing these things, I might meet a nice woman doing the same activities. Who knows? Damn it, Dad, this is amazing. Both girls looked at him, astonished. This was their father, not some enterprising adventurer. Did you really come up with all this while driving here from Charlotte? Jane asked. Well, yes, partly. Besides, I didn't sleep much, and different ideas were spinning in my head. I mean, I could start drinking and feeling sorry for myself, but instead, I'm going to make the best of this mess. Trust me, I'll be fine. Max left his daughters with more hugs, kisses, and tears, then headed back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes. As soon as Max left, the girls called their mother. Hello? A strained voice answered the phone at the Chork house. Joan put the call on speaker. Mom, this is Joan and Jane. We just had breakfast with Dad and he told us some terrible news. What'd he say? Well, he mentioned divorce and said it was because of your betrayal. Dad gave us some details, but that's the gist. Is this true? Oh, girls, this is complicated. He and I have been married for a long time, and his a mistake as I made a big mistake. Well, more than one, actually, but I'm sure we can get through it. I just need to give your father some time to— Mom, Joan interrupted. Listen, Dad said divorce. He didn't talk about fixing things. He talked about cheating. Well, yes, technically he's right, but that doesn't mean we can't fix it. I told him I would do anything. Mom, Jane interrupted, I think you're delusional. He told us that he had already met with a divorce lawyer. He said there's no turning back for you two. Joan and I don't want to take sides, but you have to face reality. They heard tormented breathing on the other end. Joan and Jane exchanged glances, wondering if they should have gone to Charlotte. Finally, Camila spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. I screwed up and ruined my marriage. I think your father hates me, and he's right. I've done awful things. He told me to hire a lawyer, and he was right about that too. I'm sorry, girls. I know it's terrible for you too. Mom, don't worry about us, Joan said. We'll be fine, and I know Dad is doing everything he can. You need to take care of yourself. Hiring a lawyer is a good idea. Jane and I can come to Charlotte if you need us. Thank you, girls. That's kind of you. I'll be okay. I just need time to come to terms with what I've done. They hung up, still unsure of their next steps. You know, Joan said, it's funny, though it's not really funny. We're more worried about Mom, who caused all this mess, than about Dad. They continued talking and eventually decided not to go home, allowing their parents to deal with the situation without their interference. Camila sat in her home in Charlotte, a bit hungover from the gin she drank the night before, and feeling very depressed after talking to her daughters. She knew she had to get up, get dressed, and leave the house, do something, she thought. Just as she considered buying more gin, the doorbell rang. Camila opened the door to find a young woman standing there, chewing gum. "Can I help you?" Camila asked. "Yes, ma'am. Are you Camila Chork, Max Chork's wife?" "Why, yes, that's me. Why do you ask?" "Ma'am, you have been served," the woman said, handing Camila a folder with documents and taking photographs. What? Camila asked as the woman walked back to her car. Camila returned to the kitchen table to look at the mysterious folder. When she saw the title of the first document, she nearly fainted. It was a petition for divorce. She remembered Max's last words to her, "Get a lawyer." As she sat there staring at the familiar kitchen she had once enjoyed with Max, she knew the happy days wouldn't return after what she had done. Camila was right. She and Max never reconciled after her betrayal. 6 years later, sitting in the ballroom of an expensive hotel and watching Jane dance with her new husband, Camila mentally plunged into the past. When the girls were teenagers, life seemed terrible. Too many activities, too much teenage angst, and boys who were either too mean or, in Camila's view, too nice to the girls. Max was too busy with his job, and her work as a lawyer was too boring. Life had been overwhelming then, but now she missed it terribly. She was still at the same law firm, doing the same mundane paperwork. "Camila, here is your wine." Camila looked at her date, a perfectly sweet, middle-aged, paunchy, balding lawyer who had escorted her to Jane's wedding and reception. "The bride looks lovely, just like her mother." "Thank you, Carl. You're sweet, and thanks for the wine." He was a kind man, and she could imagine marrying him if he was interested, but he definitely wasn't Max. She couldn't help but glance across the room at Max. Max had just returned from a mountaineering trip to Nepal, and Camila thought he looked like one of those bronze Greek god statues. Tanned, incredibly fit, even more handsome than she remembered. He was smiling and laughing with Joan and her boyfriend, holding hands with a woman as beautiful and fit as he was. Joan had told her that Max met the woman on another mountaineering trip in South America, and they had been traveling, sailing, and climbing together for several months. Camila felt sick just thinking about it. "Camila?" Carl tried to get her attention. "Yes, Carl?" "Camila, I think we should leave. You've fulfilled your duties as mother of the bride, and staying here, drooling over your ex-husband, isn't doing you any favors, and I dare say, it's not very good for our relationship either. Carl, you're sweet, and you're absolutely right. Let me go say goodbye to my daughters, and we'll leave." Camila hugged and kissed her daughters, wished the newlyweds all the best, and as hard as it was, ignored Max and his stunning girlfriend. Max noticed Camila leaving and felt a slight pang of sadness for their old times together. As he watched her, Joan asked him a question. "Sorry, Joni, what were you saying?" "Daddy, remember that strange-looking gold Mercedes you were driving when you, Jane, and I had breakfast that morning, when you visited us at Duke? What happened to that car?" "Ah, Joni, that's a whole story I won't bore you with. Let's just say I borrowed that weird gold Mercedes from a friend and ended up giving it back to her. I think she sold it. It was truly an unlucky car." And Max turned to his friend to discuss their next mountain trip.
I, 44 female, have 2 children, twin boys, with my ex-husband, 46. He cheated on me with his affair partner, and they had 2 children, a female kindergartner and a male 1 year older. He ended up marrying her. Despite all this, my ex and I decided to be civil to one another for the kids' sake. We agreed that I had the kids during the weekdays, and he had them on the weekends. It worked reasonably well. He would often bring his other children when picking up our sons. They were good kids. His wife hardly spoke to me, but she was civil and good to my children, which was good enough for me. Last year, his wife died suddenly. My ex went into depression. My sons were worried about their siblings, so I spoke to my ex, and he said that they were fine. My son asked if they could have their siblings stay over, and after asking my ex, he was okay with it. This started happening often, and it did give my ex time to get help with his depression. When I felt he was doing better, I started encouraging him to be with his children more, as I noticed his children were getting attached to me, which he did. But his children kept asking for their siblings and wanting to return to my house. My ex suggested we take them out on weekends together, which I shouldn't have agreed to, now that I think about it. Now I've got a job offer with better pay, and I decided to take it. But it would mean I'd have to move to the other side of the country. I told my sons, and they said they would miss their siblings and dad, but were excited about the move and change. They told my ex, and he got very upset with me. He rang me and said I can't take his sons away. I said we could come visit when I visited my parents, but he wasn't listening and said his kids were going to be upset. I said I'm sorry about that, but he must deal with it. He called me cruel and heartless and then hung up on me. That same day, his parents called me and said I was selfish to take away the boys and that ex's other kids needed a mother figure in their lives. I told them I wasn't their mother, and they said that they'd been watching me with them and said I was doing everything a mother does for her children. They then threatened to take me to court for the boys if I went. Since then, I've had his family text and ring me saying I was selfish and cruel and that I needed to step up. I feel so guilty. Am I the idiot for refusing to help my ex-husband raise his kids after his wife died? I'm not sure, but can you legally take your kids across the country and away from their father? Is your parenting agreement for your two kids part of the divorce settlement? OP, you need a lawyer well-versed in family law to determine the rules for moving so far away. Make sure you do everything in line with the law. That said, you're not responsible for your ex's other kids. This is for him to sort out, not the idiot, as long as you do everything by the book. I am legally able to move without my ex's permission because I have full custody. We agreed to him seeing them on the weekends outside of court, so legally, I can move without his consent. His parents threatened to take me to court to try and get back custody. Oh Lord, I suspect your ex uses you as a backup wife and mom to his kids, and that's something he and his family must figure out, not you. You need to not have any contact with his family at this point. His parents have threatened to take you to court. Their contact with you should now only be through attorneys. Your ex is responsible for his other children. Asking you to be anything to them is a slap in the face. Agreed. His kids from the affair are not your responsibility. And where is this so-called family of his when he was depressed? His relatives need to step up instead of bothering you. The audacity of expecting you to parent the kids from his affair because it's convenient for them is gross. He's your ex for a reason. Your life isn't on hold for him. His parents don't run your life. Those other two kids of his are not your problem either. It's nice of you to do what you've done already. His parents can get more involved if they're so worried about it and help him with his mental health for the sake of the two kids he has. Hoping the new job and new start bring you satisfaction and joy. I was pre-screening students for a highly sought-after internship. It only has 5 openings a semester. The interview process is an essay. This pre-screening interview over Zoom and 2 to 3 interviews afterward. This happens normally in a student's college junior year, so most candidates are at least in their early 20s. I was interviewing a young man, Dave, 21, from the online campus. Good grades, great essays, and a portfolio. I get an email that there's a third party in Zoom from Gmail. It's not uncommon to have a professor join us to sing the student's praises, and I sent the link. The time comes, and it's the student and his mom. I ask the student questions, and like clockwork, the mom interrupts him and talks over us both. Then for the achievement the student is most proud of, the mom goes into an almost 30-minute tirade about his 5th grade science fair. The allotted time for the interview is 30 minutes, and it was set in a calendar invite. With the mom talking, this pre-screen is almost an hour. The student himself has said a dozen words in that hour. I went to finish up, and I said next time, maybe let Dave speak for himself, because it's not a good look to have a mom answering all the questions at his age and this far into his degree program. The mom goes off and starts cussing at me, so I close the window to Zoom. Days later, my supervisor asked me about it because I red flagged the student in our system to not recommend him for any internship, and the mom has been emailing and calling the school about me to complain. My supervisor acted like I could have handled that better by being more accommodating to the student and his mom. Am I the idiot for telling a mom she shouldn't be in her son's interview? Not the idiot. The only thing I think you did wrong here was let that go for as long as you did. You're right to tell her, but should have done so right at the beginning, not at a half hour late. My partner actually has a similar role, albeit for hiring people. Here was his advice. Ma'am, it was nice to meet you, and we're always happy when a student has a supportive family. But this interview is somewhat confidential and has to be conducted one-on-one. So I'm going to have to ask you to log out and simply don't proceed until the helicopter flies away. Very strange for the supervisor to want to accommodate this, by the way. Mom is already harassing the staff at her place her son doesn't even work at yet. Can you imagine the tirade if he had a bad day at work or something? It's a big issue these days. It's called snowplow parents who don't want to see their kids struggle, so they just handle all the problems for them and leave them ill-prepared for the real world. Mom needs to know she's sabotaging her child. I wouldn't be surprised if she knew. I think you and the mom are idiots, to be honest. The minute you saw his mom in the interview and talking over you, you should have stopped and told them that either she left or the interview won't continue. Flagging him was also a bit extreme. I'd reach out to him personally to see if he needs help, and it should be school policy that interviews do not include parents. So I, a 30-year-old male, come from a well-off family, but my dad always taught me to work hard and have class. When I was 14, I started working at my dad's company part-time to earn my allowance, and when I turned 16, I became a full-time employee. My dad decided to retire when I was 29 and handed the business to me. Back in my second year of uni, I met Kim, a 20 male at the time, 29 now. We were in the same course and ended up in the same group for a group project near the beginning of the year. We had a similar sense of humor and clicked as friends quickly. One day, he mentioned he loves to cook, and I told him we should cook together because I love to cook too. We went to his place that weekend, brought some ingredients, and cooked together. This then became us going shopping for ingredients after classes on Fridays. I'd stay at his place the night, and then we'd cook on the weekend, and this became our weekly routine. Back then, I just told others that we were just friends, but in hindsight, that's when I started to fall for him. I finally asked him out a few months later, and he said yes. We lived in the same house with 2 other friends in our 3rd year, and I asked him to move in with me after we graduated. From the beginning, I told Kim that I would not care if he didn't work, but he insisted he wanted to contribute financially. But after about a year, I had to make him stop due to the differences in our incomes. He was working himself half to death and was getting ill trying to contribute enough. I sat him down and I told him that whatever money he made didn't matter, and that if he wanted to work, I wanted him to be happy. He cut back his hours, then moved to part-time, then decided to quit and work on his projects, but he insisted I let him take on some of the housework. Now on to the issue. My sister, 32, and her partner, 31 male, both work, and he also makes significantly less than her, and in private to me, she's made it known that she resents being the breadwinner. She sees all her male colleagues spoil and treat their wives and wishes her partner would do the same. He does, but not to the same level, due to the fact that he makes half as much as they do. Recently, I was talking to her about what I would get Kim for his birthday next month. She kept telling me my ideas were too much and that I should get something cheaper since he doesn't contribute. I got a bit annoyed because I told her about Kim's insecurities and not making or being enough. I told her he contributes more than enough. She then called him a glorified gold digger, and I yelled at her, telling her to shut up and not talk about Kim that way. After calming down, I do feel bad. I know how she feels about her own financial position, but I don't think it's fair that she takes it out on Kim or me, even if Kim wasn't physically there. So, am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Your sister's projecting her frustrations and insecurities onto you and Kim. If your relationship with Kim works for you and he, sis needs to butt out. She clearly wants something else, like big expensive gifts. She should be happy her husband is getting her gifts or flowers, because not all husbands do that. He does what he can afford to. She doesn't get the Hope Diamond if he can't afford it. But she's the breadwinner in her relationship. I think she wanted to be the gold digger, but somehow ended up in a relationship where her man makes half as much as she does. She's absolutely jealous that OP's partner gets to live out his best life, while OP spoils him when he can. OP, your sister cares too much about money status and other people's perceptions. That's her problem. She's the idiot in this. If you're happy, she should be happy for you. Her issues and insecurity shouldn't be put on your relationship. I don't know if food insecurity is the correct term, but it's the term he uses to describe what this is. Honestly, I've been with him for 3 years, and this is the first I've heard of it. So I came into this relationship with 2 kids, a younger tween daughter and an older tween son. I didn't introduce my boyfriend and the kids until maybe 8 months ago. And lately, Ben, boyfriend, has been coming and staying here with us more often than not. Sometimes he'll spend days at a time here and only go home maybe once a week. Well, lately, I've noticed little signs of weird food quirks of his that I'm not okay with. He eats enough for 5 people's days worth of food. Or instead of letting my kids dish out their food as I've always done, he's been doing it and giving them maybe 3/4 of what they would usually eat, and then loading his plate up to the fullest that it could get. I pay for all the food, just so it's clear. One time last week, my daughter asked for some more food, and he spoke up and said, there isn't enough for everyone to have seconds. I stepped in and said that she could have more, and that there was plenty for the kids to have seconds. I didn't tell him this, but I was so grossed out by it, because he literally had enough on his plate to feed 3 people, and if he had just taken a normal helping like everyone else, then there would have been plenty left over. But anyway, I spoke to him about it that night and told him that the kids come first. They eat until they're full, and that's how it goes in my house. He kind of put his hands up and said, sorry, won't happen again, and said he just figured it wasn't fair to everyone else who wanted seconds because there wasn't enough for everyone. I'm assuming he meant himself. But anyway, he apologized, so I let it go. But then yesterday evening, he went grocery shopping for me because both my kids had events, and I had a bunch of other stuff I had to do, and I didn't have time to grocery shop as well. So he told me he would go for me. I sent him with my money, more than enough, and a very specific list. Well, I had plain bagels and original cream cheese on the list. He returns with 3 different types of bagels and 3 different types of cream cheese. But I didn't complain. It's whatever. But then this morning, my kids were making themselves bagels, and Ben started scolding them for not using the correct cream cheese to go with the bagel. And he wasn't even really nice about it either. I mean, he wasn't raising his voice, but it was the look on his face. And I was immediately turned off. It was my money that bought that food, but since he went and got it, apparently he feels like it's his too, and can dictate how my children eat it. Anyway, he left for work, and I told him that this wasn't going to work out because I couldn't handle his hang-ups with food. Well, he says, I'm really sorry. I have food insecurities. I know we can make this work. I'll try harder to keep my mouth shut. But I couldn't get my daughter's face out of my head when he was scolding her, and I ultimately decided I could never change that again and told him as much. He says he can't believe I'm throwing him away instead of trying to work on this. Am I the idiot for breaking up with my boyfriend because of his food insecurities? Not the idiot. I'm not sure if food insecurity is the correct term. The expression you're after is greedy and controlling. Get him out and keep him out before he starts telling your preteen daughter she's too fat and needs to restrict her calories. Your kids do not need this eating disorder generator in their lives. This is spot on. Greedy and super controlling. He was doing his best to give your children disordered eating. Good riddance. Seriously, I'm tearing up just thinking about the awfulness she's almost certainly preventing her young kids from internalizing. Good job, OP. Kudos for putting your kids first. It starts like this. And then he'll be jealous of the time OP spends with the kids, of the money and gifts they get. And if he sees them as rivals now, there's no need to wait for the crap show in their teens. He's trying to take the first place through food. And if this gets normalized, rest will follow. LOL, he's like this when it's your money. Imagine what it would be if it were his. He's a prime example of cuckoo's nest syndrome. He has a problem, and he's making it your problem and your kid's problem. Get rid of him. Protect your kids. I have a stepdaughter, teen, with my new husband, and a daughter, tween, with my ex, who left me. My daughter adores her stepsister, but she doesn't like her back, which we understand. We planned a family vacation last summer, but we ended up having to cancel it because my stepdaughter didn't want to go on a trip with her sister and me. I ended up doing a trip with my daughter, and my husband did one with his. This year, we decided to go on a family vacation too, but this time, my stepdaughter wanted a trip with both of us, but not her stepsister, because, according to her, she's an annoying little brat and will ruin the trip. My daughter started to cry, and my stepdaughter told my daughter, "Go ask your own dad. Oh, wait, he left you." I was shocked and told her that we would not be taking her on vacation without my daughter. But my husband wanted me to tell my daughter that life is unfair and leave her at her grandparents' house while we went on vacation with my stepdaughter. My husband says it'll cost extra money to get my daughter her own room and extra cost to take her on the trip. And he said he'd rather spend that money on making the trip more memorable for his daughter. I'm honestly appalled at how much my husband favors his daughter. That day, we had a massive argument, and she accused me of not letting a teenager have a nice vacation without an annoying child. Am I the idiot? Your response should have been, tell your brat of a teenager that life is unfair and she can stay with her grandparents so you can make memories with your daughter. The fact that you've let this behavior go on for so long, not just by your stepdaughter, but also by your husband, makes you the idiot. You need to start thinking about your kid and end this marriage. Exactly. How OP responds now is going to color how her daughter views her for the rest of their lives. At the minimum, OP needs to draw a very clear line in the sand with her husband and explain that what he said is entirely unacceptable. Really, OP needs to just end her marriage. Her daughter shouldn't be bullied or belittled in her own home. I include the stepdad in the statement. Nah, OP won't do anything. Having a man is more important to her than her daughter's mental health. She wants what she wants and believes her daughter will adjust to being treated like a second-class citizen in her own home, and OP is okay with that. There's no way OP's husband would take in her daughter. I'm sure she'd end up living with the grandparents. If the child's dad was in the picture, OP might ship her off to him. Poor daughter, she deserves a better family.
Tom Williams was born into a modest family in a small town in North Carolina. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, and his mother was a school teacher. From an early age, Tom displayed a knack for leadership, often stepping up to defend classmates from bullies or rally his friends for impromptu baseball games. The small-town values of honesty, loyalty, and resilience shaped him deeply. By the time Tom graduated high school, he was set on joining the Marines. Inspired by an uncle who had served in Vietnam, he wanted to protect others and see the world. His parents were initially hesitant, but eventually supported his decision, proud of his determination. Boot camp was grueling, but Tom thrived under the discipline and structure, quickly earning respect among his peers. During his early years in the Marines, Tom's life took a pivotal turn. Stationed in Okinawa, Japan, he found himself in the thick of a tense hostage situation. His calm demeanor and quick thinking during the negotiation earned him a commendation, as well as a newfound interest in law enforcement. The experience planted the seeds for his dream of becoming a detective. When his tour ended, Tom returned stateside with a clear goal. He enrolled in a criminal justice program, juggling studies with a part-time job as a security guard. His time in college was marked by rigorous study sessions, late-night shifts, and growing camaraderie with fellow students who shared his ambition. Among them was Julia, a sharp, ambitious business major who quickly caught his eye. Julia was everything Tom admired: intelligent, witty, and fiercely driven. She had dreams of working in corporate finance and was relentless in her pursuit of success. Despite their different career paths, they bonded over a shared love of classic films and long walks in the park. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a simple courthouse wedding just before their graduation ceremonies. Shortly after their marriage, life moved quickly. Tom secured a position as the emergency dispatcher while awaiting entry into the police academy, and Julia landed a coveted role at a prestigious investment firm. They rented a cozy apartment in the suburbs, balancing the excitement of their budding careers with the challenges of building a life together. It was during this time that Julia's frequent work trips to the East Coast began, trips that would later intertwine fatefully with Tom's path. Tom relaxed on the patio, glancing at the door as he waited for Julia, his wife of nearly 20 years, affectionately called Julie. Across from him sat Sarah Miles, a close friend and co-worker. Tom exhaled a puff of smoke, stubbed out his cigarette, sipped his coffee, and lit another. "How are you holding up, Tom?" Sarah asked gently. He shook his head. "Not great, but I'm glad you're here." "That's what friends are for," she replied warmly. Tom's thoughts drifted back 22 years. Newly married, he'd just left the Marines, where he served as a military police officer. Dreaming of becoming a detective, he used his benefits to study criminal justice in college, where he met Julia, a business student. The connection was instant. Tom's commanding presence and Julia's charm made them inseparable. They married after graduation. Julia, 5 years younger, had been briefly engaged before meeting Tom. She shared little about her ex, who moved to New York, and Tom didn't ask. During his Marine days, Tom was a free spirit, but Julia changed that. She was the one. After the wedding, Tom waited 6 months to join the police academy, working as an emergency dispatcher in the meantime. Julia started a career at a national investment firm. Together, they managed to rent a modest apartment and were happy. Her job required occasional East Coast trips, which Tom disliked, but one trip brought big news. Julia was pregnant. Their son Andrew was born shortly after Tom graduated from the academy. 2 years later, their daughter Marie arrived after a difficult birth. Julia convinced Tom to get a vasectomy. Both children inherited Julia's blonde hair and blue eyes, prompting Tom's mother to once suggest a DNA test. Tom refused, firmly trusting Julia. 5 years into his career, Tom excelled in the detective exam, earning a swift promotion. With Julia's income, they upgraded to a cozy 3-bedroom home in a nice neighborhood. Life seemed perfect. At one of Julia's company Christmas parties held at a Marriott, Tom met Alf Henriksen, a New York manager. Alf's blonde hair and blue eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to Julia's, unsettling Tom. "It's great to meet you," Alf said, shaking Tom's hand. "I hear you made detective. Congrats." "Thanks," Tom replied, wary of Alf's smug demeanor. Alf smirked. "Julie didn't tell you? We were engaged in high school before I moved to New York." "I see," Tom said evenly. "It's good to finally meet you," Alf added. "Heard you earned a Silver Star in Iraq." Tom nodded curtly. "Just doing my duty." Alf's smile lingered. "The stronger man won, I guess." Tom stayed composed, though the encounter left a lasting impression. Tom spent the evening watching Julia closely, especially when she danced with Alf. While nothing about their interaction was overtly inappropriate, Tom couldn't shake the unease Alf's presence stirred. At the end of the night, Alf made a point of saying goodbye. "It was wonderful to see you again, Julie," he said warmly, then turned to Tom. "And a real pleasure meeting you, sir." "Likewise," Tom replied, his tone flat. The car ride home was tense until Tom broke the silence. "Was that the guy you were engaged to before we met?" Julia hesitated before answering softly. "Yes, that was him." "Don't you think it might have been important to tell me you work with your ex-fiancé?" Tom asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "He's based in New York, Tom," she explained. "We hardly see each other, and he's in a different department." "But you're right, I should have told you. I'm sorry." Tom sighed, his tone softening. "It's okay. So, what happened between you two?" Julia smiled faintly. "I wanted a family, marriage, kids, a home. He didn't. When he moved to New York, he made it clear he wasn't ready to settle down. That's when I ended it." "Do you regret it?" Tom asked. "Not at all," she said, her smile brightening. I have everything I've ever wanted. She took his hand and kissed his knuckles. And right now, she said affectionately, I'd love for you to take me to bed. Tom chuckled, his earlier unease fading. Your wish is my command. After that night, Alf didn't come up again. Julia's business trips continued, but Tom never noticed anything to suggest she was unfaithful. She remained devoted, and their life together flourished. Over time, Tom met other colleagues from Julia's office, but none unsettled him like Alf. Tom, a seasoned police officer and now a lieutenant, prided himself on his keen observational skills. Yet something about Julia's workplace occasionally nagged at him. Her colleagues were always polite, but there was a subtle tension in their demeanor. Among them, Alice stood out. Years earlier, Alice and her husband had witnessed a robbery that Tom resolved, and they had testified courageously in court. Since then, Tom occasionally checked in on her. Recently, however, Alice's behavior had changed. At events, her glances seemed strained, carrying a quiet unease similar to what Tom had noticed in others at Julia's workplace. At first, he dismissed it, but a growing sense of discomfort lingered in the back of his mind. One day, determined to get to the bottom of things, Tom decided to visit Julia's office unannounced. As he walked in, Alice intercepted him before he could reach Julia's desk. Julia just stepped out, she said quickly. Tom raised an eyebrow. Do you know when she'll be back? She mentioned needing to drop something off at the legal department. It might take a while, Alice replied, her tone hesitant. Tom studied her. Is everything okay, Alice? How are you and your husband doing? We're fine, she said, then hesitated before blurting. But I'm curious. Did you know Julie was seeing Alf while she was back east? Tom froze, his stomach tightening. That's not true. Why would you ask something like that? Alice avoided his gaze. I just assumed you knew. You two have an open marriage, right? Because of your injury? Tom frowned, his confusion deepening. What injury? Alice's face paled slightly. She said you were injured on duty and couldn't, Tom's expression darkened. Alice, I've never been injured on duty, and I'm fine. If you have something to back up these claims, now would be the time to share. After a long pause, Alice nodded. I have photos on my phone. I took them during one of our trips east. I thought you should know. Tom handed her his card, scribbling his email on the back. Send them to me. Alice nodded solemnly. I've seen them together multiple times. It's been going on for years. For how long? Tom asked, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. 5, maybe 6 years, Alice admitted quietly. Tom's jaw tightened. Keep this between us. Don't tell Julie I was here. Of course, Alice replied. I'll send the photos now. Tom left the office, his mind racing. Had Julia really been unfaithful all these years? He tried to replay the past, searching for signs he might have missed, but nothing stood out. She had always seemed devoted, calling him nightly during her trips, and showing no obvious changes in her demeanor. But now, he questioned everything. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with Alice's email. The photos were clear and devastating. One showed Julia and Alf locked in a passionate kiss on the dance floor. Another captured Alf's hand on her bare thigh beneath a skirt Tom didn't recognize. The final image hit him the hardest. Julia and Alf entering an elevator, her face tilted toward his, her expression unmistakably filled with longing. Tom's chest tightened, and tears blurred his vision. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. Back at his office, Tom found it impossible to concentrate. The crime board on the wall, a tool that usually brought him clarity, seemed meaningless now. After a futile attempt to work, he decided to call it a day. As he was leaving, a fellow detective caught sight of him. You doing okay, Lieutenant? The detective asked, concerned. Tom forced a faint smile. Just some heartburn. See you tomorrow. At home, Tom grabbed a beer and powered up his computer. Checking Julia's calendar, he noticed her next trip east was scheduled in 2 days and would last a week. He transferred the photos from his phone to his computer and enhanced them, zooming in to scrutinize Alf's face. His chest tightened as realization dawned. The resemblance was undeniable. Pulling out photos of Andrew and Marie, Tom compared them side by side with the image of Alf. Andrew could have been Alf's twin, and even Marie shared striking similarities. Fighting back a wave of nausea, Tom steadied himself. He knew what had to be done. Without hesitation, he contacted a DNA testing service and arranged to pick up a kit that same day. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Julia's name. Hi, Tom answered, keeping his voice calm despite the turmoil churning inside. Hey, Julia said, her tone concerned. Are you okay? You sound a little off." "I'm fine," he replied evenly, masking his unease. "Just dealing with a tough case and some stomach issues. What's up?" "I'll be working late tonight to prepare for the trip," Julia explained. "We're going out for dinner afterwards, so I won't be home until late, probably after 11. Can you handle the kids?" "Of course," Tom said, his tone steady. "Thanks so much," she said with audible relief. "Make sure they're in bed by 9:30. They've got tests tomorrow." "Will do," Tom assured her. "You're the best," Julia said warmly. "Love you." "Love you too," Tom replied before ending the call. As he set the phone down, Tom realized the hardest part of this ordeal wouldn't be finding the truth, but pretending nothing was wrong. If Julia had truly deceived him for their entire marriage, he would need to handle this methodically, like any investigation, calm, objective, and thorough. That evening, he picked up the DNA kit and returned home before the kids arrived. He hated the deception, but knew he'd need to collect the samples after they were asleep to avoid raising suspicion. For now, the truth would have to wait. Scrolling through his contacts, Tom found the name he needed, Roger Dunleavy. Roger, a former detective, had retired and moved back to New York to run a private investigation firm specializing in infidelity cases. Hoping to catch him in his office, Tom dialed the number. "Dunleavy and Associates?" Roger answered, his familiar voice brisk but friendly. "Roger, you old dog," Tom said, forcing a chuckle. "Tom Williams, long time, no hear," Roger replied warmly. "What's new?" "Not much," Tom said, striving to keep his tone casual. "How's business?" "Busy," Roger said with a laugh. "Turns out there are plenty of wandering spouses out there. What's going on? Finally decided to ditch the force and join the private sector?" "Not quite," Tom replied. "But I might have a job for you if you're willing to take it." Roger's tone shifted, becoming serious. "Tom, you're not about to tell me you think Julia's cheating, are you?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Tom admitted, his voice weighted with emotion. "And if I'm right, it's been happening for years." "Damn, Tom. That's rough," Roger said, his sympathy evident. "What do you need?" "She'll be in New York for a week starting Friday," Tom explained. "I'll send you her itinerary, along with photos of her and the guy I suspect." "You want the works?" Roger asked. "Photos, video, audio, a full report?" "Everything," Tom said firmly. "I need to know everything." Roger paused before responding. "Tom, you've had my back more times than I can count. Just cover my expenses and we'll call it even." "I don't want to take advantage," Tom said. "Don't argue with me," Roger replied, his New York accent thick. "You'd do the same for me." Tom couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Roger. You're a good friend." Roger chuckled. "Now you're catching on. Send me her details and photos and I'll take care of the rest." "I'll send them over tonight," Tom promised. "Thanks again." "Anytime, buddy. We'll talk soon," Roger said before hanging up. Just as the call ended, the kids came home from school. "Pizza for dinner?" Tom asked as they walked through the door. "Yeah," they cheered. "Mom's going away again, isn't she?" Andrew asked. "She leaves Friday and will be gone for a week," Tom confirmed. "A whole week?" Marie said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Yes, a week," Tom said, ignoring the attitude. "So, behave yourselves. Remember, I'm armed and I've got handcuffs," he joked, earning laughter from both kids. He ordered pizza, and they ate together in the living room while watching TV. As they finished, Tom asked, "Are you ready for tomorrow's tests?" "Almost," Marie said. Andrew nodded. "Well, you should hit the books before bed," Tom suggested. "Mom lets us stay up until 10 before tests," Andrew protested. "Nice try," Tom said with a smirk. "Lights out at 9. "Shouldn't it be lights out at 9 o'clock, sir?" Marie teased. "You're absolutely correct," Tom replied with mock authority. "Now get moving." The kids grabbed their books and headed upstairs. Watching them go, Tom felt a pang of sadness. They were great kids, and he loved them deeply. He just hoped the truth, when it came out, wouldn't tear their world apart. Back in his office, Tom pulled out a blank notebook, determined to treat the situation like a professional case. If he was going to uncover the truth, he needed to keep detailed records. He began by jotting down everything Alice had told him and printing out the photos she'd sent, carefully attaching them to the pages. Next, he added pictures of Andrew and Marie, lining them up beside the enhanced images of Alf. The resemblance was undeniable. Beneath the photos, he wrote a single word: paternity. He opened his calendar and began cross-referencing Julia's quarterly trips with the timelines of both pregnancies. The dates matched too perfectly to be coincidence. His mind drifted back to their conversation after the party where he'd met Alf. Julia's words echoed bitterly in his head. "I have everything a girl could dream of." "Yeah," Tom muttered under his breath. "Everything. A life in New York with him and a fool at home raising your kids." His jaw tightened. "Damn you, Julie." By 9:45 p.m., he closed the notebook and locked it securely in his desk drawer. Taking the DNA test kit, he quietly checked on the kids. Their lights were off, and both were sound asleep. Moving with care, he collected the necessary DNA samples, kissed each of them on the forehead, and ensured they were tucked in before leaving their rooms. In the quiet of his study, Tom added his own DNA sample to the kit, filled out the accompanying paperwork, and packed everything into his briefcase. Leaning back in his chair, he let his thoughts race. If Julia had been unfaithful, divorce was inevitable. But what would come next? Custody battles, child support, alimony. These questions loomed large. And what about the possibility of fraud? If Julia had knowingly listed him as the father while knowing Alf might be the biological parent, could she be held accountable? "What the hell have you done, Julie?" he whispered into the stillness. Tom climbed into bed but couldn't sleep. When Julia came home just before midnight, he was still wide awake. "You're still up?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Couldn't sleep," he said curtly. "Do you want to talk about it?" "It's the case I'm working on," he lied. "A guy comes home, finds out his whole marriage was a lie, and discovers the kids he's been raising aren't his." "Oh my God," Julia said, her hand flying to her mouth. "What happened?" Tom feigned anger. "He eliminated her, then the kids, then himself." She stared at him, horrified. "That poor man!" Tom glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I can't even imagine how he must have felt." After a pause, Julia leaned closer. "You know I love you, right?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Tom replied. "And you believe me?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Good," she said, her tone lightening. "By the way, I'm leaving a day early. I'll head out tomorrow instead." "What? Why?" Tom asked, unable to hide his surprise. "I need to settle a few things before the meetings start. I left my itinerary on the kitchen table." Tom forced a nod, masking his irritation. "I was hoping to spend some time with you before you left." "I'm sorry," she said, heading to the bathroom. "I really need a shower." As soon as the door closed, Tom grabbed her purse and fished out her phone. He tried her usual passcode, but it didn't work. She'd changed it. "When did you change this?" he muttered, his unease growing. Setting the phone back, he rifled through her purse. His fingers brushed against a small box, and he pulled it out. Plan B. The label read, "Emergency Contraceptive." Tom's stomach dropped. Julia had always said she stayed on birth control for health reasons, but this was something else entirely. His mind raced through the implications. There was no reason for her to have this unless she was hiding something. He snapped a photo of the box with his phone, carefully returned it to her purse, and crawled back into bed. When Julia emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp and fragrant with lavender soap, she slipped into bed beside him, snuggling close. Normally, Tom would have held her, pulling her into his arms, but tonight he turned away, inching toward the edge of the mattress. Startled by his rejection, Julia withdrew, her confusion palpable. In the dim light, he could feel her staring at his back. "Does he know?" she wondered, tears stinging her eyes. But she said nothing, and neither did he. The silence between them was deafening. The next morning, Tom was distant and cold. He avoided speaking to Julia as she packed, instead immersing himself in his usual routine. After showering, shaving, and dressing, he poured himself coffee and spotted the itinerary she had left on the kitchen counter. Picking it up, he studied it briefly before tucking it into his briefcase. Without a word, he walked the kids to school, keeping his face impassive. When he returned home, Julia was waiting by the door. "Aren't you going to kiss me goodbye?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Tom paused, his hand on the doorknob. Turning, he met her gaze for a long moment. "Call me when you get there," he said flatly. "Tom, I really do love you," she said, her tone soft and insistent. "Uh-huh," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "I know." He opened the door and left, leaving her standing there, confused and hurt. "This must be weighing on him more than I thought," she reasoned. Once at his desk, Tom scanned her itinerary and forwarded it, along with the photos of her and Alf, to Roger. He also dropped off the DNA samples for processing and scheduled a meeting with Lucy Hawkins, a no-nonsense divorce attorney known for her aggressive tactics. If it came to that, Tom wanted to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. Determined to stay productive, Tom tried to refocus on his work. For a while, it seemed like he had regained a sliver of control, until his phone buzzed with a call from Captain Smith. "Williams, get to my office, now!" Smith barked. Tom let out a weary sigh, rising from his desk. As he walked through the precinct, his colleagues exchanged questioning glances, sensing something was off. Entering the captain's office, Tom closed the door as instructed and took a seat. Smith leaned against his desk, his arms folded. The normally gruff captain's tone was uncharacteristically gentle. "Okay, Tom, what's going on?" Tom hesitated before finally speaking. "I think my wife is cheating on me," he admitted quietly. Smith's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he waited patiently for more. Tom exhaled deeply, the words tasting bitter as he said them. "And it's not just recent. I believe it's been happening for our entire marriage. There's a chance, a real chance. The kids might not even be mine." Smith's expression darkened as he ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, Tom, I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry." "I've already got wheels in motion," Tom said. "I've hired a private investigator, set up a DNA test, and I'm meeting with Lucy Hawkins this afternoon." "Good," Smith said with a nod. "You're doing the right thing, but you should also talk to Dr. Wilkerson." "The department psychologist?" Tom asked, his brows knitting together. "Yeah, you're one of my best. But this is a lot for anyone to handle. You need someone to help you process this so it doesn't bleed into your work. Trust me on this." Reluctantly, Tom nodded. "All right, thanks, Cap." Smith offered a small, encouraging smile. "You'll get through this, Tom. Just keep your priorities straight. Now get out of here before I start charging you rent for loitering." Tom gave a faint smirk and left the office, heading directly to Dr. Donna Wilkerson's office. When he arrived, she greeted him with her signature warmth and a knowing look. Well, Tom Williams graces me with his presence. This must be serious." "It is," Tom replied, sinking into a chair. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Donna listened intently as Tom detailed everything, his suspicions, the evidence, and his next steps. "But you don't have hard proof yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Tom said. "That's why I'm working with a private investigator and waiting on the DNA results." "Have you consulted a lawyer?" Donna asked. "Yes, Lucy Hawkins." Donna nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. But Tom, this isn't just about you. If your suspicions are confirmed, it's going to rock your kids' world. You're the only father they've ever known." "I've thought about that," Tom said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I've always taught them the importance of honesty. I can't keep this from them if it's true." Donna placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Remember this, Tom. Biology doesn't make a father. You're their dad no matter what the test says." Tom gave a solemn nod. "Thanks, Donna. I won't forget that." Later that afternoon, Tom met with Lucy Hawkins in her office. He laid everything on the table, the photos, his suspicions, the DNA test, and the private investigator's involvement. Lucy listened carefully, her sharp legal mind already piecing together a strategy. "We'll wait for the test results and the investigator's findings," she said. "If your suspicions are correct, this goes beyond infidelity. If she knowingly listed you as the father while suspecting otherwise, we could pursue charges of paternity fraud." "Paternity fraud? That's a thing?" Tom asked, surprised. "It is," Lucy confirmed. "And in this state, it's taken very seriously. Depending on the details, we might even look at perjury if she's ever lied about this under oath." Tom shook his head, overwhelmed by the implications. "This is going to get messy." "It already is," Lucy replied bluntly. "But we'll handle it. For now, don't tip her off. Let her dig her own grave." Tom left the meeting feeling a mix of resolve and dread. When he got home, his phone rang. It was Roger. "Hey, Tom, how are you holding up?" Roger asked. Tom sighed, sinking into a chair. "Hanging in there. Julie's probably on her way to New York by now. I just met with my lawyer. We're holding off on any moves until the evidence comes in." "Smart," Roger said. "I managed to set up a camera in her hotel room. It's motion and voice activated, and it streams directly to a private server. I'll send you the IP address and login info so you can monitor it in real time." Tom grabbed a pen and jotted down the details. "Thanks, Roger. I owe you." "Forget it," Roger replied. "I'll be tracking her when she lands. We'll touch base soon." After hanging up, Tom immediately logged into the camera feed. The screen showed a blank room, pristine and untouched, but the sight of it filled him with a gnawing unease. Meanwhile, Julie sat by the airplane window, gazing out at the clouds. Her thoughts wandered back to the last 20 years. On the surface, her marriage to Tom seemed perfect. He was everything she thought she'd wanted, strong, devoted, and an amazing father to their children. He had taught Andrew and Marie life skills, instilled discipline, and shown them unconditional love. But even as Julie reflected on Tom's virtues, she couldn't escape the weight of her secret. She had convinced herself over the years that her actions were justified. Alf had been her first love, and the chemistry they shared had never truly faded. His charisma and commanding presence had been intoxicating even after all these years. Alf had always been clear about his disdain for fatherhood and commitment, which was why their engagement had fallen apart. But part of Julie had never stopped longing for him. When Alf left for New York, she thought she'd moved on. Then, Tom came into her life, a man who treated her like royalty and offered the stability Alf never could. She married Tom quickly, determined to leave the past behind. Yet the moment Alf re-entered her life, those old feelings resurfaced, bringing with them a dangerous temptation she could no longer ignore. Despite her life with Tom, Julie had never truly let Alf go. Their connection rekindled shortly after she started at Apex Financials, a position she had secured thanks to Alf's glowing recommendation. Their affair reignited during her very first quarterly meeting in New York. Julie knew the stakes, but she meticulously crafted a facade to keep Tom oblivious. She called him nightly during her trips, ensured she looked flawless upon her return, and maintained the rhythm of their family life as though nothing had changed. Julie had even orchestrated her pregnancies. While she and Tom had agreed she'd remain on birth control until they were ready for children, she had secretly stopped taking her pills before her trips to New York. She wanted Alf's children and made sure her plan succeeded. When Tom initiated closeness during those times, she would feign illness or claim to be on her period, avoiding any chance of conceiving with him. When Julie became pregnant with Andrew, Tom had been ecstatic, though surprised. She explained the pregnancy as a rare failure of her birth control, and Tom believed her without question. Alf, knowing the truth, had agreed to let Tom be Andrew's father in all but biology. The same pattern unfolded with Marie's birth. After Marie's complicated delivery, Julie persuaded Tom to get a vasectomy, citing her health as the priority. This removed any possibility of accidental conception with Tom, allowing her to carry on her affair without concern. For years, Julie and Alf met discreetly during her quarterly trips. At first, they were cautious to avoid suspicion at work, but over time, their closeness became harder to ignore. About 5 years ago, Alice, a newer member of Julie's team, confronted her after noticing the dynamic between her and Alf. "Julie, I'm just going to say it," Alice had pressed. "Are you and Alf involved?" Julie didn't miss a beat, crafting a lie on the spot. "Yes, but it's not what you think. Tom knows. We have an open marriage. He's fine with it as long as it's kept out of town." Alice frowned, skeptical. "That doesn't sound like the Tom I've heard about," Julie sighed, feigning vulnerability. "Tom was injured in the line of duty. It left him unable to, well, you know. He's embarrassed about it, so please, don't bring it up. It would devastate him." Though hesitant, Alice had reluctantly agreed to keep quiet. But the lie had left a sour taste in her mouth. Julie's thoughts were interrupted by the announcement that the plane was beginning its descent into LaGuardia. She straightened her seat, fastened her belt, and prepared to land. At home, Tom sat motionless in front of his computer, waiting for the live feed from the hotel room to activate. According to her itinerary, Julie's flight had already landed, and she should be arriving at the hotel soon. The screen flickered and the camera came to life. Tom's heart sank as he saw Julie wheel her suitcase into the room. Moments later, Alf entered behind her. Tom's hands clenched the desk as he studied the scene. Alf's features were unmistakable. Andrew's face stared back at him, aged 2 decades. He watched as Julie embraced Alf, their connection clear in every movement. His worst fears materialized in vivid detail. As the two kissed and fell onto the bed, Tom turned away from the screen, his stomach churning. For a moment, he composed himself, then forced himself to continue watching. He needed to see this through. When they were finished, Julie's voice cut through the silence. "I really needed that." "Same here," Alf replied casually. "So, how's the deputy husband?" "Don't call him that," Julie said sharply. "Tom is a respected officer." "Sure," Alf said, smirking. "Respected enough to have no clue his wife's been sleeping with me for years. The guy's been raising my kids, and he doesn't even know it. Maybe I should send him a Father's Day card." "Don't you dare!" Julie snapped, swatting his arm. Why do you have to be so cruel? When are you going to leave him? Alf asked, his tone serious now. Not until the kids are out of the house, Julie said. Maybe after Tom retires. That way I'll still get part of his pension. Alf leaned back, studying her. I've been thinking, what if you transferred to my department? That way we could be together all the time. Julie hesitated, then said, maybe once the kids are older. Marie's almost 17, so it won't be long. Alf nodded. After all these years, what's another couple? But I'd like to meet the kids at some point. We agreed, Alf, Julie said firmly. From the beginning, we decided you wouldn't have contact with them. I know, he said. But after the divorce, maybe? Maybe, Julie conceded. Alf glanced at his watch. We should get ready for dinner. We have a reservation. Julie stretched and stood. I'll shower and change. See you downstairs in half an hour? See you then, Alf said, pulling her close for another kiss. I love you. I love you too, Julie replied, using the same words she so often said to Tom. Tom sat frozen as if paralyzed. His worst suspicions were no longer just theories. They were fact. He watched as Alf left the room and Julie picked up her phone. A moment later, his own phone buzzed. He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello? He said, his voice flat. Hey, Tom. Just wanted to let you know I made it safely, Julie said, her tone cheerful. Good, Tom replied curtly. How's the case going? She asked. Making progress, he said, bitterness barely veiled. I'm close to nailing down my main suspect. That's great, Julie said brightly. I know how much it's been weighing on you. You have no idea, Tom muttered. Well, I'm off to dinner now, but I'll call you tomorrow. Love you, she chirped. Tom's voice was emotionless. Sure, I'll tell the kids you called. Ending the call, Tom stared at the blank screen. Julie's words echoed in his head, hollow and meaningless. He had everything he needed to confirm the truth. But for the first time, he wondered what his next move would be. Tom ensured the video was saved securely on his hard drive before shutting off the monitor. By the time he returned to the living room, Andrew and Marie were home from school. Greeting them warmly, he masked the storm raging inside. His demeanor gave no hint of the unraveling truth he now carried. The following morning, Tom received a call from the DNA lab. The results were ready. He drove to the lab, picked up the sealed envelope, and opened it in his car. The confirmation he feared hit him like a sledgehammer. Neither Andrew nor Marie was biologically his. Despite the pain threatening to engulf him, he pulled himself together and headed straight to Lucy Hawkins' office, clutching the DNA results and a copy of the video evidence. Lucy reviewed the documents meticulously before speaking. The DNA results are significant, she said. This gives us a strong foundation. But the video, we can't use it in court. It wasn't obtained through legal means. Tom nodded, his expression grim. I figured as much. Even so, Lucy continued, we have enough to move forward. We'll file for divorce citing infidelity and fraud. While this is a community property state, judges often consider infidelity during asset division. What about paternity fraud? Tom asked. That's a bit more complicated, Lucy admitted. We need her to admit she knowingly falsified the birth certificates. A confession, ideally in front of witnesses, would bolster your case. I'll figure out a way to get her to admit it, Tom said, determination hardening his voice. Good. Come back on Wednesday and we'll plan our next steps, Lucy said. That evening, Julie called as usual, her tone affectionate and sweet. Tom kept his responses brief, avoiding any declarations of love. After they ended the call, he turned back to his computer monitor. The feed showed Julie slipping into bed beside Alf. His jaw tightened, but he continued watching, knowing the evidence would be invaluable later. On Wednesday, Tom met with Lucy again. This time, District Attorney Marvin Morrison and Deputy Sarah Miles joined the meeting. Marvin laid out a clear plan. We need a confession, Marvin said firmly. If she admits to falsifying the birth certificates, we can use that to build a stronger case. She's coming home Saturday morning, Tom said. I'll make sure the kids aren't in the house. Good call, Marvin replied. We'll have Deputy Miles standing by to serve the divorce papers and, if necessary, arrest her. Tom nodded, determined. Understood. That evening, when Julie called, Tom asked casually, You're still planning to come back Saturday morning, right? Yes, of course, she replied. Great, Tom said evenly. We should do something special when you're back. That sounds nice, she said. You know I love and miss you, right? I know, Tom replied, his tone neutral. You don't sound very convincing, she pressed. You haven't told me you love me all week. I loved you. Tom said, emphasizing the past tense. Good night. Julie hesitated but said, Good night, before hanging up. She stared at her phone, her expression troubled. Tom smiled faintly, knowing her worry was just beginning. That Friday, Tom packed bags for Andrew and Marie and drove them to their grandparents' house. The children were confused and questioned why they couldn't stay home. Mom's coming back tomorrow morning, Andrew pointed out. I need to talk to her alone, Tom said gently. I'll explain everything to you both in the afternoon. Marie's voice wavered. Are you divorcing her? Please tell me you're not. Tom's face softened, though his heart ached. It's not something I can stop. Did you cheat on her? Marie asked sharply. No, Tom said firmly. I've never even thought about another woman during our marriage. Andrew frowned. So she cheated on you? Tom sighed. I'll explain everything tomorrow. For now, just trust me. The ride was silent, except for Marie's quiet tears. When they arrived, Julie's mother, Maggie, met them at the door, concern etched across her face. What's going on, Tom? Maggie asked. Why is Marie crying? Tom rested a hand on her shoulder. I need to have a serious conversation with Julie in the morning. I'll explain everything to you after. You're not going to hurt her, are you? Maggie asked, her tone wary. No, Tom said firmly. But there are things you need to know. You're divorcing her, aren't you? Maggie pressed. Yes, Tom admitted, and for good reason. I'll explain tomorrow. Maggie reluctantly nodded. You'd better. That night, Tom watched the live feed. Julie sat beside Alf, laughing as they talked. The sight stirred a storm of emotions, but he forced himself to stay composed. Picking up his phone, he dialed her number. Hi, Tom, Julie answered, her tone bright. Are you still on schedule to be home tomorrow morning? He asked. Yes, she said. How's the case going? Almost wrapped up, Tom said. By this time tomorrow, the suspect will be in custody. Good, Julie said cheerfully. Then maybe things will go back to normal. Maybe, Tom replied flatly. We'll talk in the morning. He ended the call and returned his gaze to the monitor. Julie stared at her phone, tears brimming in her eyes. Tom leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming. Tomorrow, he muttered. Everything changes tomorrow. Tom stood on the back porch, finishing his cigarette as the sun began to rise. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Sarah arrived, stepping out of her patrol car with a determined expression. Together, they prepared for the confrontation, ensuring everything was ready. By 7:45, Julie's car pulled into the garage. Tom watched silently as she walked toward the house, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. She pushed open the door leading to the back deck. Tom? She called, her voice confused. What's going on? Who's this? And why is there a patrol car in the driveway? Where are the kids? Tom stood calmly. The kids are with your mother, he said evenly. This is Deputy Sarah Miles. Please have a seat. We need to talk. Julie glanced warily at Sarah, then back at Tom. I need a shower first, she said dismissively, brushing past him. Not this time, Julie, Tom said sharply, his tone brooking no argument. Sit down. We're doing this now. Startled by the force in his voice, Julie hesitated before reluctantly sitting down across from Sarah. Tom took the chair at the head of the table, angled toward her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a digital recorder, and pressed the button before placing it on the table. I hope you don't mind if we record this conversation, Tom said, his voice calm but unyielding. Given the circumstances, I think it's appropriate to advise you of your rights. Julie's eyes widened, panic beginning to creep into her expression. What are you talking about? Tom's voice was firm. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Do you understand these rights? Julie stared at him, her voice trembling. I understand, but I'm not one of your suspects, Tom. I haven't done anything wrong. You are very much a suspect, Tom said coldly. In fact, you're my primary suspect. He pulled out 2 sheets of paper and slid them across the table. Do you recognize these? Julie glanced at the documents, her brow furrowing. Yes, they're the kids' birth certificates. What's this about? For the record, Tom said evenly. Whose name is on the signature line? Mine, Julie replied. On both of them. Read the statement under your signature, please, Tom instructed. Julie hesitated before reading aloud. Under penalty of perjury, I certify that the above is true and factual. And who is listed as the father? Tom asked, his voice tightening. Julie's eyes darted nervously between the papers and Tom. You are, she said quietly. Read the name, Tom said, his tone steely. Julie swallowed hard. Thomas Jefferson Williams, she said softly. Tom pulled out another document and placed it before her. This is a DNA test from Acme Labs. It compares samples from me, Andrew, and Marie. The results conclusively show that while Andrew and Marie are siblings, neither of them is biologically related to me. So, Julie, tell me, who is their father? Julie's hands shook. You are, Tom, she stammered, tears pooling in her eyes. Tom's gaze hardened. Don't lie to me, Julie. Not anymore. He took a deep breath and gestured toward the laptop on the table. Let me show you something, he said, clicking play on the video file. Julie's face drained of color as the footage rolled. The recording left no room for ambiguity. It captured her and Alf during their recent rendezvous, their words and actions damning. How did you get this? Julie stammered, her voice quivering. That's not the question, Tom shot back. The real question is why you and Alf conspired to defraud me. You both admitted in this video that Alf is the biological father of Andrew and Marie. You knowingly and willingly put my name on their birth certificates. That's fraud, Julie. Her face contorted with anger. Fine, she snapped. I wanted Alf's children, not yours. Yes, I signed the certificates naming you as their father. It was my decision. Tom's voice dropped, icy and controlled. It's not your right to commit fraud. What did you tell your co-workers about your relationship with Alf? That's none of your business, she spat. Do you know Alice Blackstone? Tom pressed. Yes, Julie replied tersely. Do you recall what you told her about our marriage? Julie hesitated. I might have told her we had an open marriage, she muttered. But that wasn't true, was it? Tom said, leaning forward. No, Julie admitted reluctantly. And what else did you tell her? I said you were injured, Julie mumbled. Injured how? Tom asked. That you were injured on duty and couldn't perform sexually, Julie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom leaned back, his expression stony. So you lied to justify your affair, and you didn't stop there. You told others the same thing. Julie dropped her head, unable to meet his gaze. Yes, she whispered. Tom exhaled, pushing back his chair. I think we're done here. He nodded to Sarah, who stood and handed Julie a manila envelope. Julie Williams, you've been served, Sarah said formally. Julie blinked in confusion as the weight of the moment sank in. What is this? She asked. Divorce papers, Tom said coldly. On the grounds of infidelity and fraud. Sarah's voice turned firmer. Please stand, Mrs. Williams. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Julie's head snapped up. What? Why? You're under arrest for 2 counts of paternity fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud, Sarah said, producing a pair of handcuffs. This can't be happening, Julie cried, panic overtaking her. Oh, it's happening, Tom said. Fraud is a felony in this state. I suggest you get a lawyer. As Sarah led Julie to the patrol car, Julie turned, her face streaked with tears. Tom, please, she sobbed. I love you. Tom shook his head, his voice devoid of emotion. If this is love, I'd hate to see what you'd do if you didn't care. He watched as Sarah drove away, leaving him standing alone. Though relief washed over him, it came with a deep sense of loss. For over 20 years, he had loved Julie. Now he had to face their children and explain the unimaginable betrayal that had torn their family apart. Tom arrived at Maggie and Cliff's house later that morning, his laptop in hand. When Maggie opened the door, her face was tight with worry. Tom, what's going on? She asked. It's time to explain, he said grimly. Where are the kids? In the backyard, Maggie replied. I'll bring them in. Minutes later, everyone was gathered in the living room. Cliff, Julie's father, looked at Tom expectantly. What's this about, son? Where's Julie? Tom drew a steadying breath. She's in county jail. Cliff's eyes widened. Jail? What for? Tom glanced at Andrew and Marie, his heart breaking. What I'm about to tell you will hurt, but you deserve the truth. Looking at the children, he continued. Your mother, she lied to me. She lied to all of us. I'm not your biological father. Marie gasped. That's not true. You're our dad. Tom's voice softened. I raised you. I love you. But biologically, I'm not your father. The room fell into a stunned silence. Tom continued, his voice steady. Before I met your mother, she was engaged to a man named Alf Henriksen. She wanted to marry him and have his children, but he made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of fatherhood. So she decided to have his children anyway, without his commitment. Maggie's face paled as recognition dawned. I remember him. Tall, blonde, Scandinavian-looking. I even have an old picture of them. She left the room and returned moments later with a photo album, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Handing the picture to Cliff, she watched as his expression darkened. The resemblance between Alf and the children was undeniable. Tom nodded. That's him. Julie and Alf worked together to list me as the father on your birth certificates, fully aware it wasn't true. Andrew frowned. Wait, so Mom's in jail because she cheated on you? No, Tom explained firmly. She's in jail for paternity fraud. When she signed those birth certificates, she committed a felony. It's a serious crime in this state. Marie's lip quivered. What happens to us now? Are we going to lose you too? Tom leaned forward, his voice softening. Never, sweetheart. I've already petitioned for custody of both of you. I may not be your biological father, but I raised you, and I've loved you both every single day of your lives. I'm not going anywhere. Marie broke down, rushing into Tom's arms. I love you, Daddy, she sobbed. Andrew stood frozen for a moment, then walked over, tears streaming down his face. Am I still your son? He asked quietly. Tom pulled him into the embrace. Of course you are. You'll always be my son. The three of them held each other tightly, their tears mingling as they found strength in their bond. I love you, Dad, Andrew said. I love you too, son, Tom replied, his voice thick with emotion. We'll get through this. Together. Cliff cleared his throat, breaking the silence. What happens to Julie now? She's being held in county jail, Tom said. The DA is pursuing charges, and they're working to extradite Alf to face conspiracy charges as well. Julie may call you from jail. Maggie's face fell. What if she's released on bail? She might ask to stay here, Tom said calmly. But I've already packed her belongings. They're in the garage. Just then, the phone rang, cutting through the tense atmosphere. All eyes turned to it. Maggie answered, her voice firm as she greeted her daughter. Julie's frantic and tearful voice echoed faintly through the receiver. It took Maggie several moments to calm her enough to speak. Julie, listen to me, Maggie said sternly. Tom has told us everything, and I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed. If you didn't want to have Tom's children, you never should have married him. Julie's response was muffled, but Maggie cut her off sharply. No excuses. You broke the law, Julie. We raised you better than this. If you're released on bail, you can stay here. But don't expect sympathy from us. The kids are staying with Tom. More muffled protests came through the line. Maggie turned to Andrew and Marie. Do you want to speak with your mother? The children exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. No way, they shouted in unison. Tom and Cliff couldn't help but laugh softly at their bold response. Maggie turned back to the phone. I'm sorry, Julie, but they're not ready to talk to you. Maybe after they've had time to process this. We'll look into finding you a lawyer. But for now, goodbye. She hung up, her lips pressing into a thin line. Cliff sighed heavily. Well, she's got a lot of growing up to do. Maggie softened as she looked at Tom and the kids. How about they stay here one more night? That'll give you time to settle at home. Andrew nodded, and Marie agreed. Maggie turned to Tom, her eyes filled with compassion. Go home, Tom. Take care of yourself. You've been through enough. Tom hugged her tightly. Thank you, he said before shaking Cliff's hand. Turning to his children, he hugged them both. I'll pick you up tomorrow. I love you. We love you too, Dad, Marie said, her voice trembling with emotion. On Monday, Julie appeared in court for her arraignment. District Attorney Marvin Morrison argued persuasively, highlighting the gravity of her crimes and the risk of flight. The judge ordered her held without bail to prevent her from fleeing to New York to be with Alf. 3 months later, Julie's trial concluded. A jury found her guilty of 2 counts of paternity fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison with parole eligibility after 6. Her company terminated her employment following the verdict. Alf was extradited and convicted on similar charges. He received a 5-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 3. Tom's civil suit against Alf resulted in a significant financial settlement, which Tom placed in college funds for Andrew and Marie. The divorce was finalized soon after. Lucy's careful legal strategy ensured Julie received only 30% of their shared assets. Tom ensured those funds would be accessible to her upon her release, but neither he nor the children visited her in prison. After one traumatic visit, Marie refused to go back, and Andrew supported her decision. Life slowly returned to normal. Andrew graduated high school and joined the Marine Corps, following in Tom's footsteps as a military police officer. Tom beamed with pride, bringing Marie to Andrew's graduation ceremony, a moment that brought the family closer. Tom continued his law enforcement career, eventually being promoted to captain after his mentor retired. Despite his professional success, he showed no interest in dating, much to Marie's frustration. One day, Marie handed him a note. "Here," she said, grinning mischievously. "Miss Harris, my English teacher, wants to meet you." Tom raised an eyebrow. "This isn't one of your matchmaking schemes, is it?" "Who, me?" Marie replied innocently. The next day, Tom met Miss Harris, who greeted him warmly. When their hands met, he felt a spark he hadn't felt in years. "Call me Brenda," she said with a smile. "And you must be Captain Williams." "Tom," he corrected. "Marie said you wanted to see me." "She may have exaggerated," Brenda said playfully. "But it's nice to meet the father of one of my favorite students. I hear you're single." Tom chuckled nervously. "Marie likes to meddle. Are you?" Brenda's eyes twinkled. "I am. Maybe we should let her meddle a little." Tom grinned. "Dinner?" Brenda nodded. "Let's see where this goes." For the first time in years, Tom felt hope for a new beginning.
I'm selfish. That's what I tell myself every night when my house is quiet without my kids. My ex-husband has a good reason to hate me. My immediate family is split, and I've never stopped hating myself for what I did. My selfish act happened in 2015, at the age of 39, and I confess I took my ex-husband for granted. He used to call me beautiful daily, wanted closeness, took care of me, and treated me as his equal, not like a queen or princess. We were married for 20 years. High school sweethearts, each other's only. My family loved him, and he supported my brother through tough times. He was the go-to person when others needed help. A good man. Over the years, I gave him 2 strong boys, 18, 16, and twin girls, 13. I gained weight, felt self-conscious, but he always told me I was beautiful. Our arguments were rare, but when they happened, they were mostly about closeness, which I wasn't always in the mood for. When I turned 39, my birthday party revealed a new me. After a year in the gym, doing yoga and Pilates, I went from 180 to 135 pounds, an amazing transformation for a formerly chubby girl. My ex-husband joined me at the gym, but not as much. He went from 260 to 225 pounds, shaping his body. Despite his increased affection, I still wasn't in the mood. We tried dinners, dancing, walks, and he helped around the house. He always looked at me with desire, even after 20 years. Any woman would want that desperately, but mentally, I just wasn't into it. At the time, I thought it was early menopause, having closeness 2 or 3 times a month, and I was a one and done. He wanted more, but I refused couple counseling. Then my selfishness took over. A new manager in my office showed interest a few days after my birthday. He was slightly younger and handsome, and for some reason he took an interest in me. At first I ignored him, then it turned from ignoring to casual conversation. Then he flirted, and I showed him my ring. After 2 months of constant flirting, I flirted back, leading to me telling him about my life. I found myself thinking about him more and more. I now realize it was an emotional affair, but at the time I felt high. My ex-husband suspected something was off. We had a heated argument, one that I honestly believed started. When he tried to kiss me, I made a disgusted look, not towards my ex. I was thinking about this man when he leaned in, and I felt disgusted with the whole thing. At least that's what I tell myself. A week later, I told the new manager to meet me at a cafe to talk. I intended to tell him to leave me alone, that I couldn't do this, but before I could say anything, he kissed me, and my mind went blank. That was the start of our 6-month affair. During that time, I did things with him that my ex wanted. I was more eager and willing, always in the mood because it was something new. Although my ex and I had closeness during this time, it wasn't as frequent. I started pushing him away, nitpicking on little habits, even belittling him. I'm ashamed of how I treated him. I only realized what I was doing when my brother visited and told me my ex confided in him about feeling depressed and thinking about separation. He felt that I didn't love him anymore, and he was falling out of love with me. That snapped me out of it. I immediately ended the affair, quit my job, and told myself I would make my husband feel loved and wanted. I was determined to fix this and be a better wife. My affair partner came to my house with a box from my office containing things I asked to be shipped. We talked. He wanted to know what went wrong, and I said I needed to fix my marriage. I told him to leave, but he insisted on one last encounter, and foolishly, I agreed. We ended up in the guest room. I don't know how long it lasted, but suddenly he flinched violently. There was a loud bang, and my ex was in the room. My AP was on the floor, and there was a large hole in the wall. I tried to say something to my ex, but his eyes were bloodshot, tears flowing, and his lips trembling. He was in so much pain, and I felt disgusted. I watched as my AP stood up and tried to leave. My ex looked at him, and my AP told him to step back if he knew what was good for him. So, my ex attacked him. I screamed and cried, telling my ex to stop. Out of desperation, I jumped on his back, resulting in me getting slammed to the floor. Everything got hazy for a while. Words sounded muffled, but when I came to, my ex had my AP on his side, on the phone. All I could do was stare at my AP's swollen face and the blood and teeth on the floor beside him. There was a loud bang on the door, and I watched my ex put the phone on speaker, slowly placed it on the floor, dropped to his knees, and placed his hands on the back of his head. The door opened, the police came in, handcuffed him, and the paramedics arrived. I soon learned that he called special services on himself. Everything went downhill. At the hospital, my father didn't utter a word. He just looked at me with shame. My brother yelled at me, crushed, asking how I could do that to my ex. My mother consoled me, causing my father to yell at her. His family was furious, his sisters threatened, and his parents looked like they wanted to send me to an early grave. I approached my children and they refused to speak to me. My sons couldn't even look at me. My AP was heavily injured, needing reconstructive surgery on his face. My ex practically shattered his face. At the hospital, a woman came to my room and immediately attacked me. My brother pulled her off me, and it turned out she was my AP's wife. I didn't know he was married. He never wore a ring or said anything. It made me feel even more terrible. Leading to the trial, my boys stayed with their grandparents on my husband's side, and my girls refused to talk to me. My ex didn't want to see me either. I tried to visit him at the county, and I was denied. My brother made sure my ex went to the correctional facility he worked at to keep an eye on him. When I asked my brother to relay a message for me, he told me to go to hell. During the trial, it was the first time in 3 months that I saw him. He looked at me with such anger, hurting more than anything I could ever imagine. He always looked at me with love, even when we were mad at each other, but during that trial it was hate, and I needed to excuse myself to cry in the restroom. As the days went by, I was forced to recount my affair in every detail for all to hear. When I told them how long it was, my ex looked crushed, and my father stood up and walked out of the courtroom. During my ex's testimony, I learned that he came home to surprise me with lunch and a weekend trip for 2 to the Catskills. He had a full romantic getaway planned, only to walk in on us, and he reacted. He stated when the AP ordered him to step aside, he snapped and smacked him, only stopping when he tossed me off him. He quickly called special services and heard the recording at court. Hearing the pain in his voice, his sobs as he did what the operator told him to do was soul-crushing. The AP couldn't verbally testify and was heavily medicated, so they used images of what he looked like, turning my stomach because I was responsible for all this. My ex smashed his eye socket, cheekbones, and destroyed his jaw. They stated that there were bone fragments too small to piece together. My former partner got charged with a 3rd-degree felony and got a 7-year sentence, leading my sons to protest loudly, daughters and his family to wail, haunting me still. The initial 3 months were incredibly painful. I got sued by my almost partner soon-to-be ex, APSTBX, wife, for alienation of affection. My ex initiated a divorce. The eldest son moved out, another son isolated himself, and my twins rebelled fiercely. My former sisters-in-law attacked me at Price Chopper. His mother spat in my face when I tried to apologize. Father and brother refused to speak to me. Eventually, I had to find a new job since there was no income, and I nearly depleted savings, but I was practically blacklisted in my field. The accounting firm faced bad publicity, so I started working in retail and as a seasonal H&R Block adjuster during the tax rush. I almost lost the house. My ex refused visits, and every letter was returned. Crying in the shower became an almost daily occurrence. My parents almost separated because my mother constantly defended me. My brother refused to acknowledge me. Even lifelong friends were divided. Soon, I contemplated ending things, picking up my belongings, and disappearing. The guilt was overwhelming. Eventually, I sought therapy, and the therapist scolded me, saying I had become too comfortable with my ex. I didn't see him as a husband, but as a friend with benefits, and I treated him as such. She was right. I took him for granted. Almost a year passed in silence from my children. When I cooked dinner, they would collect their food and go to their rooms, refusing to look at me. I had meltdowns, begging them to say something, but nothing. My brother got married, and I wasn't invited, but my kids were. I continued trying to visit my ex, hoping he placed me on the visitor list, but I was always denied. Letters were still being returned, deepening my severe depression. One day, my brother showed up out of the blue. Shockingly, he scolded me, revealing my ex was in the infirmary after getting stabbed during a ravishment attempt by an inmate, resulting in my ex getting stabbed in the stomach and the inmate getting his spine broken. My brother screamed at me, "You did this!" before leaving. I cried for days because he was right. I did this. Attempts to visit him at the infirmary were futile. For 4 additional years, I tried to talk to him and wrote letters, but they were returned. Thankfully, our children visited their father frequently, and I learned he was placed in protective custody by my brother since the attack. Over the years, my eldest attended the same college and took the same major as my ex. He only calls his siblings and never wants to talk to me. He never comes to the house for holidays, only to his grandparents. Another son followed suit, going to the same college and refusing to call me. My twins were hard on me, but they visited their father weekly, improving their mood. Whenever they got overly rebellious, their uncle disciplined them. My brother and I still hardly spoke. Attempts to visit his wife when they had their first child resulted in being asked to leave. My mother kept me in the loop on what was happening in their lives, but my father still refused to acknowledge me. In early May this year, my kids were happy, and my sons returned home. I didn't know why, and I didn't care. They were home. For 4 months, my children were around, and I did everything I could to express my apologies. Most of the time I was ignored, but they started talking to me, bringing me joy to have conversations with them, learning about their lives. My eldest had been dating someone for over a year. My second-born was on a college track team, and even my girls started talking to me again. It intensified my self-hatred for what I did to them. Witnessing them smile, joke, and share dinner together, I missed those moments deeply. By the end of August, I was excited about the twins' first day of their senior year, coinciding with their 18th birthday. I shared my enthusiasm for their birthday party, but my girls asked if we could do it on a different day. This confused me, thinking we were starting to get better. When I asked why, one of them said, "Because Dad is throwing us a party, and I don't want you near him." This comment shocked me. I asked when their father was released, and they said he got out at the end of April for good behavior, leading to tears as it broke me a bit more. They were around more because he was out, happier and cheerful with their father back in their lives. It wasn't because we were starting to heal. They had him back. I asked where he was staying, and they told me he was staying with my brother. I tried calling, needing to talk to him, but he refused. I went over, holding all the returned letters through the years, saw him briefly through the door crack, shouted his name, and was asked to leave by my brother. I handed him the letters and left. In the driveway, I heard his voice, turned around, and he was walking towards me. I instantly started crying, hugged him, and he handed me back my letters, coldly saying, "You forgot this." I cried, watching him walk away. I begged him, pleaded for him to talk to me, and he just walked back into the house. My children stared at me by the door, and they all had no love in their eyes for me. At that moment, I realized my children were just tolerating me. However, I still want to fix this. I want to tell him how selfish I was, how much I missed him, apologize for destroying what we had. So I'm still trying to push through my daily life. I learned from my mother that my almost partner's ex-wife was visiting my ex 2 years ago, and she's been coming around to see him. I don't care really. I just want him to somehow forgive me, talk to me, be beside me, look at me the way he used to. I want my kids beside us. I just want my family back. Yet I know I don't deserve it. Even if by some miracle we become one again, it will never be the same. I was selfish and I wish I could take it all back.
Second story. This is response to my mother's post. I try hard to keep my history a secret. My college friends are unaware that my dad spent time in prison, and I'm not interested in sharing it with them. When I roamed around campus and overheard people discussing and sharing a particular post, it brought back a flood of emotions I've been trying to cope with. Investigating further, I found enough details to confirm it was about my family, which made me furious. I contacted my mother, and her emotional reaction triggered an argument. Similarly, when I visited my dad and confessed, it led to a confrontation. Despite this, I believe my father is a good man. He only scolded me for disrespecting my mother. He advises me that, even if I don't love her, I should still respect her. It's tough to respect someone like her. My father faced many challenges, and often emphasized that we should be grateful for growing up in an area where achieving academically wouldn't lead to attacks. He shared how difficult it was for him in the South Bronx, where pursuing white things like going to college made you a target. At 15, my father's father passed away from cancer, and he had to step up as a surrogate parent for his 2 sisters. With no life insurance, he worked hard to contribute to rent and food while attending school. He considers it fortunate that his mother remarried a good man, and they moved to upstate New York for a better life. According to my uncle, in the 90s, my dad's unique style, including baggy clothes and a Puerto Rican flag shirt, attracted teasing from his friends. Unexpectedly, my dad fought back, earning their respect. Instead of walking away, he helped one of them and suggested skipping school, sharing a 40, and talking things out. This led to friendship, and he introduced my dad to my mom. They attended the same college, and by the end of their freshman year, they were married. During my upbringing, my parents were affectionate, always holding hands and kissing, even during my senior year when things went awry. Despite acting like a teenager in love with my mom, my dad never placed her on a pedestal. He advised me against it, explaining that women won't respect a man who does so. His philosophy, treating your wife as an equal, best friend, and confidant, was passed down from his father and stepfather. My dad, a big guy at 5'11" and 260 pounds, was always joking and active despite his weight. I cherished the moments when he sang to my mom and did thoughtful gestures like serenading her, buying flowers, and writing love notes for no reason. He defended her honor and always expressed how beautiful she was. My dad set an example for the kind of man girls should have in their lives. He stood by my uncle, never giving up on him, even when others thought he was a lost cause. As my grandfather once said, my dad knocked the stupid out of him and left behind the man he was supposed to be, a phrase that always made me laugh. My dad showed me how to be a man, a friend, and a husband. Before her affair, my mother always loved my dad, and he was her support system. Even though they had the ideal marriage, my mom ruined it. I remember those months when she talked down to my father, and he pushed back but restrained himself. Despite his college education and successful career as a financial advisor, my dad could switch from 0 to a more assertive demeanor in seconds. Grandma said he was like his father, kind, respectable, and helpful, but he wouldn't hesitate to defend himself with strength. My dad tried everything, buying flowers, taking her out to dinner, dancing, but she was in her own world, treating him poorly. We all witnessed it, especially its impact on my brother and twin sisters. Despite that, my dad smiled and assured us they would work it out. He believed Mom was stressed from work, especially when she quit her job. I genuinely thought her job was the issue. Then my dad got arrested. Mom, do you know the embarrassment we felt when the whole school was talking about it? Dad was arrested because you cheated. I couldn't stand to look at you, so I stayed at Grandma's. The sight of you disgusted me, and when I visited Dad, he couldn't bear to look at me. He was ashamed and said he failed as a husband and as a man. I told him he didn't, but he insisted he did, because a responsible man would think about the consequences before doing something so foolish. As a husband, he felt he failed because his wife betrayed him. I pleaded with him to look at me, but he wouldn't. Then you had the audacity to ask for forgiveness, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to physically hurt you. We were all hurting, and you sought forgiveness. Sitting through that trial, listening to that special services call, was the worst 25 minutes of my life. 25 minutes of hearing my father, who would have done anything for you, crying and asking the operator for help. He repeated over and over that the love of his life cheating hurt us more than anything. I know you tried to act as a character witness for Dad. We all told you not to do it, but you did it anyway. Why? Did you want to show us that you still loved him? Tell the court he's a good man? In my opinion, that cross-examination, where you revealed how long you were with that person, was why we lost him. If we had a proper lawyer instead of an appointed one, he might have walked. I had anger issues because of that. My brother became a closet drinker, and one of the twins was suicidal, but you didn't notice. All you wanted was to try and fix things with Dad, leaving me to support my siblings. I hated you, and in some way, I still do. When I went to college, I wanted nothing to do with you. Like my father, I had to be a surrogate parent to my siblings. I was working a full-time job, going to college, and sending you money for bills. Mom, I know it was hard, and you were depressed, but you had help with the bills. Grandma defended you out of family loyalty, not belief. At least that's what the twins believe. When Dad got stabbed, I almost had a nervous breakdown. I had just seen him that day, making jokes about the prison body plan. I was halfway back to school when I got the phone call. I nearly crashed the car because my brain turned off. It was tough for everybody. I didn't tell anyone this, but I sat outside that person's apartment, wanting to confront him. When I saw him walking with that cane, I remembered what Dad said and drove off. As the years passed, Grandma died, then Grandpa from broken heart syndrome, and Dad couldn't attend the funeral. Did you know that both his sisters got married in the waiting area so he could give them away? The damage you've done is tremendous, and it didn't help that you kept asking us to forgive you, to give you another chance. You never gave us room to comprehend, to heal. You just kept asking, and all I see is that you wanted to make yourself feel better. You didn't give a damn. You didn't try. You just gave us space and acted as if we were supposed to suddenly act normal again. Yes, you did try in the later years, but not during the time you were supposed to when it was most important. When Dad got out, he told us to start talking to you, saying you're a good mother. So we did, and it made you happy. For a while, I remembered what it was like not to hate you. Dad had issues finding work initially, but one of his old clients hired him. I didn't expect the twins to drop that bomb on you. Dad didn't want you to know he was out. When you appeared, it bothered him. He threw up after speaking to you, saying the very sight of you sickened him. She's been seeing Dad weekly for over 3 years, and they've been spending time together since he got out. So please stop fantasizing about getting back together. If you want to talk or fix things with your children, call me. Your post last week about our worst moment was pure selfishness, as Dad sees you only as the mother of his children, nothing more. I'm Ben, short for Benjamin Timothy Haggard. Shannon and I got married 7 years ago, but things haven't been going well lately. Despite my efforts, I can't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction with how our relationship has developed. This feeling has stuck with me for about 6 weeks, even before an unexpected photo appeared. The tension between Shannon and me has been increasing, especially in the last few days, and I suspect her sister Nita is somehow involved. After I received the photo, I found myself working outside the city on a more challenging project than usual. There was a critical issue with the main refrigeration unit at Purdue University, and despite our efforts, the team couldn't solve it. As an employee of the reputable Fraser HVAC company, I'm one of 2 highly qualified engineers responsible for solving such emergencies. Luckily, It was my turn to be on duty that week. So on Tuesday, I went on a 4-hour trip to West Lafayette and stayed there until Thursday. We finally solved the problem around 9 o'clock in the evening. Exhausted, I decided to have dinner at the nearest place on the university grounds, and by around 10 p.m., I went to my hotel room. I quickly sent Shannon a message saying I was going to bed, and we'd continue testing the system the next morning. I also mentioned we'd meet for dinner on Friday. After a refreshing shower, I got ready for bed with ESPN playing in the background. Unexpectedly, I received a message from Roland Bruton, my closest colleague at Fraser. The message included an apology and a photo taken that evening at Casa del. Roland asked me to call him if I wanted to discuss this further. The attached photo showed a couple sitting at a table in a cozy restaurant, leaning against each other with intertwined hands and locked gazes. It was Shannon, my beloved wife, and standing next to her was Eric Chesterton, a colleague from the OSU library. I've never treated Eric warmly, considering him a bit strange, but the idea that he might be connected to my wife never crossed my mind. Recently, our relationship had been strained, and the thought of Shannon betraying me with another man was unimaginable. Realizing that doing nothing would only fuel my growing anger, I decided to turn off the TV and contact Roland. I conveyed my apologies for disturbing his Thursday night, pausing to grasp the situation. I explained to Roland that it was time to discuss what he had seen. I shared that Emily and I had an early dinner, and as we finished, we noticed them on the other side of the restaurant. Emily had spotted Shannon and asked if it was her. I was intrigued, so I observed them for a while, taking pictures. Fortunately, they didn't engage in any affectionate gestures like kissing. They seemed deeply engrossed in conversation, mirroring the scene in the photograph. There was a hint of regret in Roland's voice as he exhaled loudly. He conveyed to me that he sincerely apologized. I inquired about their departure, asking if they left together and where they were headed. Reflecting on the incident, Roland continued by saying they waited in their car in the parking lot for a short while, but Shannon and the other man never appeared. Eventually, they decided to leave and sent me a photo. Roland expressed regret for leaving in a hurry without waiting for them, explaining that it seemed they had just received their drinks and hadn't started eating, suggesting a significant wait. A heavy silence followed, leaving both of us perplexed, unsure of what to say. Eventually, Roland spoke, expressing his understanding. He conveyed that he now understood the situation and went on to share. "I get it now. My friend Emily wanted me to send you her warm regards. She's upset with Shannon, and I share her feelings, though it hasn't fully hit me yet. I'm sure I'll be furious in a few hours." I inquired about the Purdue job, asking when I could come home. Roland provided the information, stating, "Yes, we plan to test it tomorrow morning, and after that, I'll make a 4-hour trip back. It'll give me time to calm down and remind myself not to act impulsively." I responded with a smile. Deep down, Roland was aware that I wouldn't resort to violence against Shannon, and he understood that perfectly. Roland mentioned that he and his friend Emily had been discussing something, but it was probably too early to bring up. He offered, "If you ever need a place to stay overnight, we have a guest room just for you." I conveyed my gratitude, expressing, "Thank you, Roland. I really appreciate it. I don't know my next steps yet, but I'll definitely consider your offer." After a few more minutes of quiet conversation, I ended the chat. I turned off the light, lay down, and quickly fell asleep. After all, no marriage is perfect, right? Despite our flaws, I genuinely loved Shannon and did everything I could to make her happy for 7 years, including 3 years of dating. Of the 4 who married, we faced constant issues. From my observations, the main problems were money and closeness. Luckily, we didn't encounter problems in these areas. Neither of us was a wasteful spender, and our private connection remained as crucial to both of us as in the early months of our relationship. Though things became more routine, Shannon and I still desired each other equally. No, for us, the problem didn't relate to finances or closeness, but with Nita. She was 35, about 4 years older than Shannon and me. Her husband, Alex, wasn't any better. He was a vain lawyer who saw himself as superior, but at least I didn't have to endure his presence so often. Shannon always looked up to her older sister Nita, a frequent guest in our house who constantly gave unsolicited advice on how we should live. Shannon suggested that it would make more sense to store the dishes in one place and move the spices elsewhere. She commented on whether I still used a gas grill, stating that charcoal enhances the taste of meat much better. She also expressed her opinion on the hideous green chair, describing it as screaming trailer park in general. That conveyed her overall perspective on the matter. It deeply bothered me that Shannon couldn't resist and ask her to leave. The most unpleasant part, sparing you the detailed list of Nita's other offenses, was that she consistently belittled me behind my back. If I was in the room, she'd be overly kind, endlessly praising me for being nice to Shannon, for being caring, for being so helpful around the house, while poor Alex, according to her, couldn't even change a light bulb. Overhearing her speak negatively about me more than once when she thought I wasn't around, one day, while Shannon and she were having coffee in the kitchen, I quietly entered through the back door after a jog. She conveyed to Shannon that she adored her, but had to admit that I, Ben, could be a bit uncouth. She expressed that I didn't have the same charm as Christopher or even Tom, and despite my higher education, she questioned why I worked with my hands. In her opinion, Shannon could have chosen someone much better. I couldn't understand her thinking, especially considering we had been married for almost 2 years by then. It was frustrating to hear Nita reminiscing about Shannon's past boyfriends. She later asked if I was seriously thinking about having children with him, sounding upset. Just 5 minutes later, she appeared in front of me with a smile and mentioned that Shannon and she were just talking about what a wonderful husband she has. I couldn't believe it. Shannon and I had argued about this many times, and though she had calmed me down, she never took any action to solve the problem. She mentioned that Nita wasn't that bad and actually liked me, but I waved her words away. I expressed my emotions, exclaiming how I couldn't stand it when Nita said we were definitely not going to have children. Overwhelmed with emotions, I paced back and forth in the bedroom, consumed by anger. Disappointment overwhelmed me, and I feared I was on the verge of losing my mind. My wife tried to calm me down, explaining she was venting her discontent and loved me despite her tendency to incite quarrels. But this quarrel was one of the worst in our lives. I couldn't contain my emotions and ended up saying a few rude words, after which I ran out of the house. I was gone for 6 long hours, seeking solace with my friend Raphael, the bartender at Bob's restaurant. Mostly, I just sat there trying to clear my head. When I got home at midnight, I found her sleeping in our bed, turning away from me. The atmosphere was tense, and our conversation was limited to a simple exchange of good morning wishes and a request for more coffee. Within a few days, the situation began to improve and become warmer, but it was never fully resolved. It was clear Shannon loved me, but I couldn't understand why she wouldn't take my side and ask her sister to stop humiliating me. The only way out for me was to avoid Nita as much as possible, making excuses so I wouldn't be home when she came. Besides, I tried to minimize conversations about her with Shannon. The weeks leading up to my trip to West Lafayette were particularly stressful. Oddly enough, Nita was present in the house more often than ever before. Almost every day when I came home from work, she and Shannon had important conversations in the kitchen. Perhaps for this or another reason, Shannon began treating me colder and more distant. She realized it wasn't worth mentioning her sister in my presence, leaving me in the dark about what was going on with Nita. But apparently Shannon still distanced herself from me, although our communication remained polite. But who needs simple politeness with his wife? She became cautious around me, and our closeness decreased noticeably. Recently, Shannon and I have been distant from each other for several weeks, exchanging only the usual hugs. Due to the strange atmosphere, it was challenging for me to approach her, and I was on the verge of giving up. Our private relationships also became routine, with only a few occurrences in the past month. Though not great at deep conversations, I did try once or twice. I asked Shannon if something was bothering her, if we needed to have a serious conversation. I wanted to solve our problems, but she said it was okay. She mentioned concerns about changes at work and minor issues with Nita, but nothing requiring special attention. "I appreciate your concern, dear." A forced grin and a peck on the cheek, that's all I got in response. This behavior continued for quite a long time, and I decided to have a long conversation with Aunt Gwen. Aunt Gwen, my mother's younger sister, played a significant role in my upbringing after my father's pass away and my mother's subsequent illness. Although she now lives in Seattle, we often talked on the phone. If anyone could help me understand Shannon's behavior, it was undoubtedly Gwen. When I returned from Purdue, I decided to call her over the weekend. After Roland sent the photo, I made a deliberate effort to set aside the confusion and focus on my work. On Friday morning, my main goal was to test the system's capabilities, ensure it handled the load, and quickly move on. By about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we had successfully completed all necessary checks. As a thank you gesture, the Purdue team invited me to a quick lunch, and then I headed home. During the 200-mile journey, my mind was filled with numerous puzzling questions. Had they already been private? Or was it just a possibility? Did my actions contribute to this situation? I also wondered if Shannon's feelings for him were genuine or just a passing fling. Could I find the strength to forgive what happened? Or was our relationship beyond repair? And did Nita play a role in this? Did she encourage her sister's actions? Maybe. Approaching Columbus in chaotic Friday traffic, I didn't have a clear answer, but I knew I wasn't ready to face her at home. After considering Roland's generous offer of his guest room, I ultimately chose a modest room at Motel 6, had a hearty steak and beer at Outback, and spent another night alone. With a sense of satisfaction, I sent Shannon the least affectionate message possible. I'm almost done, and I have to go home tomorrow. No sweet words or emojis, just the essential information for her to know I was alive. She replied, "Okay, honey, I miss you." Yes, that's correct. Around 9:30, I drove back to our street, slowly past our house, checking for unfamiliar cars nearby. Nothing seemed unusual. The house was dark, except for our bedroom, where the curtains suggested the TV was on. Disappointed, I returned to Motel 6 and went to bed. When I returned to the house shortly before noon, there was no rush. I felt a wave of emptiness and indifference. If earlier I was consumed by anger and vindictive thoughts, now I longed for resolution. I needed to find out the truth, assess the consequences of this ordeal, and confront them face to face. Shannon's absence and the eerie silence in the house only intensified my emotions. Entering the house through a side door, I went upstairs to freshen up and organize my things. Then, I went down to the kitchen to make a sandwich. My gaze involuntarily shifted to the front door. I stood paralyzed. A large suitcase stood untouched at the entrance. Approaching it, I felt its weight, indicating it was full. Time seemed to slip away, and I couldn't figure out how long I'd been fixated on it. The silence was broken by the sound of a side door opening. Shannon came in, greeting me softly. "Hello, baby." With an unusual half-smile, she hugged me warmly, more like a grandmother than a passionate embrace between spouses. After a week apart, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I wasn't planning to raise my voice or create a scene. I just wanted to understand the situation. She led me back to the kitchen, holding my hand, and we sat at the table across from each other. Expressing concern, she mentioned that I must be tired and asked if I had eaten. She inquired if she could cook me lunch and asked what I wanted. I reassured her, saying I was fine, and focused on her face. Leaning closer, she conveyed seriously that she needed to talk to me, expressing urgency. She apologized and watched me patiently, waiting for a response, but I remained silent. Eventually, she inquired if she could ask me something and requested that I remain calm and refrain from anger. She wanted to tell the whole story before hearing my thoughts and acknowledged that she was asking a lot. I nodded in agreement, and all I wanted was for the situation to be resolved. She took a deep breath and began talking about Nita. To my surprise, anger suddenly surged within me. I expressed my frustration, asking, "What does this rude woman have to do with it?" Shannon pleaded, her face filled with panic, and she begged me to listen. I noticed that my fists were tightly clenched, and I was holding my breath. After rising from my seat, pacing around the kitchen and settling back down, I took a deep breath, attempting to compose myself. In due course, I responded, "Okay, go ahead. I promise to listen, so I will." I couldn't help but speculate on how the conversation might shift if she began discussing her sister. It hinted at the possibility of enduring a more extended discussion. After giving me a cautious glance, she began again, explaining that she had been spending a lot of time with Nita lately. She hoped I could understand how it was affecting her and creating tension. She mentioned that things had taken a turn for the worse between Alex and Nita, and she suspected him of betrayal. About a month ago, Nita found him with one of his assistants on the office table, and Shannon witnessed the unfolding scene, feeling a strong sense of sympathy for Nita. It goes without saying that it was an incredibly tough time for her. Nita experienced deep heartache and anger, unsure how to handle the situation. Alex constantly apologized, expressed a desire to reconcile, and promised to do everything possible, including seeking counseling to improve their relationship. But everything changed on Tuesday. Feeling depressed, Nita decided to take a break to calm down, and then requested Alex to leave, expressing her desire for a divorce. Unfortunately, he resorted to physical force, leading to her hospitalization. On Tuesday evening, she endured a concussion. In that moment, my own marital struggles briefly faded from my mind. I conveyed sympathy, stating, "I'm sorry, Shannon. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." She lowered herself, took my hand, and conveyed gratitude, remarking, "Thank you, dear. I understand that you don't like her, and that means a lot to me." Now comes the toughest part. She paused and explained that Nita would be discharged from the hospital on Monday, but had nowhere to go. Alex is acting extremely difficult and refuses to leave the house. She wanted to offer her our guest room where she can stay. Most likely she'll have to take sick leave and work part-time for a couple of weeks. She wanted to be close to her and take care of her. She hurriedly explained, "I know you don't like her, and you don't want to be around her, but she has no one else to turn to. Please, Ben. Her life is falling apart, and I am her only sister." "Shannon, you're right. She's not the kind of person I particularly enjoy being around, but it doesn't matter now. Of course, she can stay with us. Did you really think I would refuse?" She got up excitedly, circled the table, and settled on my lap, wrapping her arms around me. When I looked into her eyes, pure joy radiated from her face. Expressing her gratitude, she whispered, "Thank you, my love." Her lips met mine in a gentle kiss, assuring me that everything would be fine. She vowed to protect me and ensure we saw each other less often. With utmost sincerity, she promised never to let her sister belittle me again. Never again. The happiness emanating from her overwhelmed me, and I couldn't resist hugging her tighter. As I put my head on her shoulder, tears welled up for a moment, and I composed myself. Carefully, I moved her from my lap to a nearby chair. I went to the sink, poured a glass of water, unable to endure the anticipation any longer. "Okay, Shannon, can we just finish this? Let's get this over with, whatever it is," I pleaded. She looked at me with confusion, and I couldn't help but express my disappointment. "Honestly, you can't even be honest with me," I said. "Dear, I sincerely don't understand what you're talking about." "What is the rest?" she asked, disappointed. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages until I found the photo Roland had sent me, and shoved it in her face. "This, Shannon, you and this man," I said to her face. The revelation left her speechless. I was momentarily puzzled by the sight of her suitcase at the front door. How could she leave when she was helping her sister move in with us? Before I could finish, she said, "Oh, Ben, this is incredibly sad. Carrie, his wife, has a recurrence of breast cancer, and their 2-year-old twins are in the center of events. He is absolutely terrified, and my heart is bursting with grief." I stared at her, suddenly grasping the importance of the photo where she was with a man. "Yes, we had dinner. He really needed someone to talk to. Her prognosis is uncertain right now." She held my gaze for a moment, conveying a deeper meaning. "Did you genuinely believe it? Oh my God. Did you think it was a romantic dinner? That's how it appears, right?" I couldn't even control the tone of my voice. "Roland and Emily Bruton certainly thought so. They are ready to meet you face to face." Before I could say anything or take any action, she hugged me tightly. "Benjamin Timothy Haggard, you are the only man I have loved or even considered in the last 7 years. Eric is just a friend whose wife is suffering from a terminal illness. I offered him emotional support when he needed it. It became harder and harder for me to breathe, not just because she refused to let me go. Additionally, I couldn't help but notice tension in our environment over the past few weeks. We lacked communication. Physical closeness was scarce. I was consumed with worry about Nita, my love, and I couldn't trust you with this. The mere mention of her name disgusts you, so I carried this burden alone, which led to distance. I apologize for being so distant. My thoughts were exclusively focused on Nita and the vile actions committed against her. Okay, I guess I can understand that. But the suitcase caught my attention. It was standing, fully packed at the front door. As I looked at it, she gently pulled my head down and kissed me on the lips with a long, sincere kiss, and then met my tear-stained eyes. It was obvious that something had happened. I decided to go to Nita and Alex's house and gathered clothes so that she would have everything she needed for the coming weeks. "Baby, I'm very sorry about the misunderstanding that happened." She apologized with regret in her voice. "I'm very sorry about this misunderstanding," I said regretfully. "You've had this photo since Thursday, and I can imagine how you suffered. My love, I'm very sorry." Without letting go of my hand, she gently pulled me towards the stairs. Her urgency left no room for delay. We had to solve something extremely important urgently. In the private atmosphere of the bedroom, we gently took off our clothes, hugged, exchanged tender kisses, and shed tears of love. We hugged each other tightly, fervently, and passionately, making tender love completely immersed in the presence of my soulmate. While lying in bed, our hands explored each other's bodies as we engaged in intermittent conversations. I asked, "Really?" And she responded, "Yes, really," her voice filled with affectionate tenderness and playful teasing. She continued, "I really saw his wife. And did you really think that I was cheating on you?" Our friends Ro and Emily had the same thought. Although I despised the fact that his wife has cancer, it made me think about the state of my own marriage. I confessed, I thought it was over, and she expressed her concerns, saying, "I believe that one cheater in the family is more than enough. Poor Nita." As an epilogue to our conversation, it dawned on me. I'll be damned if it hasn't stopped completely. Nita, I must say, she looked completely different, which is not so surprising considering what she had recently been through. At the same time, she expressed great gratitude for being in our house and constantly praised Shannon for becoming her husband. She apologized to me countless times, admitting that she had completely misjudged me. In the end, I insisted that everything was fine and she could stop apologizing, but she still tried to help, even taking on some of the responsibilities of cooking and housework. When she began to feel better, after she managed to find a fierce and determined lawyer, she finally got the opportunity to gain some financial stability and secure a nice apartment for herself during the chaotic divorce process. Despite the circumstances, he and Shannon continued to spend time together, but it was very nice to have the house at their disposal again. It was a calm and restorative period, almost reminiscent of a second honeymoon. We both acutely realized the value of our relationship and the depth of our affection. Watching a marriage breakup turning into a destructive mess served as a visual reminder to us that we need to cherish and appreciate our own marriage. There are noticeably more smiles at home. Only 4 months later, we received the joyful news about the recovery of Eric's wife. Despite the fact that Eric continues to be eccentric, I am sincerely happy for their positive outcome.